Hello and welcome to the Weekly Stuff Podcast with Jonathan Lack.
And Sean Chapman.
We are here to talk about stuff this week on the show. I have finally, after 117 hours and 29 minutes, beaten Elden Ring, the FromSoftware masterpiece that has taken the gaming world by storm over the last couple of months. But I am finally done with it. I saved the world. I don't want to spoil the ending right now, but I picked an ending that I was happy with, and I have beaten Elden Ring, and you have beaten Elden Ring a couple of weeks ago, so you've been done with it for a while.
I mean, it's been almost like a month at this point, I think.
Yeah, because I had a whole thing where I was away for 2 weeks from my PS5, so I couldn't play it, and then when I got back, I was busy, and so it had taken me a while to finish it, but I am done with Elden Ring, you are done with Elden Ring, and so we are finally going to be doing the Elden Ring podcast.
Yes, we will be talking about Elden Ring.
Yes, in full spoiler detail. So when we get to that part, we'll let you know. But if you have not finished the game, it'll be a topic where anything is on the table. We've kind of tread, I would actually say, fairly lightly on Elden Ring in our other conversations so far, because it's a game you can play in such any order. You don't want to just like randomly spoil things for people.
Yeah.
But this will be our full, we have both experienced the game and we are going to talk about it. So later on in the show, that'll be our main topic today. But let's go ahead. There's not a lot of news on the show today, I don't think. The only thing I could have, I think, put on the outline for this show is the Thor Love and Thunder trailer did come out and is great. So I will just highlight that. I'm very excited for that movie.
Yes, so that is a very fun little like kind of teaser trailer that, yes, I like Thor. I'm excited for that movie.
Yeah.
I like how much it looks like they're taking that subtitle very seriously.
Exactly. So anyway, but let's just do some stuff to kick off the show. Sean, what have you been up to?
Well, I guess like the first big thing is last night I finished reading Fullmetal Alchemist.
Oh, wonderful!
I'm done. I blazed through that thing because that is, as is often the case with shonen manga, it is a real fucking page turner. Particularly when you start getting into like building towards the ending.
It's so funny because it's so true because it's like the last third of Fullmetal Alchemist is the Promise Day stuff.
Yeah.
Which is, not to spoil it, but it's the big like final conflict all happens on this one day. And I remember, Sean, when Thomas and I got up to that point, we were watching the anime Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood together. We blazed through like the last 25 episodes of that thing in like 2 days. It is such a page turner. But I'm curious, what did you think of the last half of the series?
Yeah, I like Fullmetal Alchemist a lot. Like, I think there's stuff that could be better. I think there are a couple of elements of... I think, in general, I like the ending quite a bit. I do think Ed and Al get lost a little bit in the kind of... that whole Promise Day section. This is like a very common thing I think happens in a lot of shonen stuff I've seen. Where you kind of like lose a little bit of the thread on your main characters. And so when it brings it back to them at the end, it feels like there's like a step or two missing. And so there are a couple of things throughout the series that I think could have been a bit better. But overall, I really like it a lot. I like the very kind of unique sense of Fullmetal Alchemist, that it's quite unlike any other thing I've read, because it's such a unique blend of like dark fantasy style shonen manga and like battle shonen, where the battle shonen side of it doesn't really come into play much until the second half. There aren't many fights in the first half of the manga, and then in the second half they start like kind of really going harder in that direction. But I like that it feels like the main thrust and the main concern of the manga is primarily the kind of like the character stuff, and then the conspiracy, right? It's much more of a kind of like big kind of conspiracy story of unraveling the mysteries of the world that they live in and this weird homunculus, and like how the society they live in is constructed, and how like the systems of power in that society work and where it all actually comes from. And that element of it makes it feel very different than any other kind of shonen manga thing I've really read. Again, outside of something like Claymore is a bit like that. Attack on Titan, at least the part that I watched, like has some of those vibes as well. But Fullmetal Alchemist's like specific blend of things is quite different than anything else, and I think that's one thing that's cool, is that it feels very fresh, even reading it like 10 years after it finished. There's nothing else that I think quite like hits on these notes, at least nothing else that I've ever seen.
Yeah, and I think I would generally agree that I do think Ed and Al get a little backgrounded in the second half, but I think the way they like pull it all together at the end works so well for me, and I think it's just got such a like good solid character-driven ending that like is very touching and fun and feels so complete. It's just, to me, it's very close to like the platonic ideal of how you end a long story like that. It's wholly satisfying. You're not going to be, you can quibble around the edges, but no one's going to walk away feeling like they got shafted by the story,
No, yeah. It feels, it's the thing where it sets up, like, broadly, like, what it wants its ending to look like very early on, right? You have your expectation of, like, what their primary goal is around getting Al's body back and all of that. And I think, like, the way that all that stuff plays out is good. And particularly, I think the kind of, like, epilogue element, I guess, of, like, you'd have your like, the climax of the actual fight, and then you have some stuff that shows, like, them kind of going back to life after this battle and everything. And some of that stuff is my favorite stuff in the whole series. Like, the art in particular in the home stretch, I think it's really good. It's good throughout. But Arakawa, the mangaka, doesn't use a lot of 2-page spreads throughout the series, but then when you get into that home stretch, there's quite a few of them that are really good. And it's one of the things that I really enjoy about reading manga digitally, because I read most of this through Kindle, Amazon Kindle, although I have to deal with some shit now because you have to jump through a bunch of hoops if you're American or you're outside of Japan and you want to do Japanese Kindle stuff, and it feels like they caught me. They know that I'm not actually living in Japan and buying these things. But I got them through. There's another service called Bookwalker that doesn't give a shit and is fine if you want to pay them money for digital manga. They're like, yeah, great, sure. Like, who fucking cares? I don't know why. What is the deal that Amazon Kindle's like, no, you have to live in Japan. We refuse to allow you to pay us money for this thing you could only possibly buy out of a Japanese service, a Japanese manga.
It's probably a licensing thing with the actual rights holders. I doubt that's Amazon Japan's decision.
No, yes. But it feels incredibly absurd when it's like, I just want to pay money for this thing, please, for the love of God. But I read the last few volumes through Bookwalker. But anyways, like, so I read them digitally, and when you do big 2-page spreads digitally, it's awesome because you don't have the, like, kind of awkward folded part where the pages meet. That always kind of distorts the image. And so just being able to sort of, like, go landscape and just look at this big 2-page spread, particularly, like, right near the end, there's one with the main character standing on a rooftop looking at, like, a horizon. That is, to me, like, the best kind of, like, note at the end that just feels like that image is so good. And there's a lot of big 2-page spreads like that aren't even, like, they're not 2-page spreads that are done to, like, sort of convey a lot of, like, busy, complicated information, which you sometimes see, particularly in, like, a fight sequence. They're big 2-page spreads that are there to deliver, like, a really powerful emotional beat by using, like, negative space and the just, like, sheer quantity of, like, negative space in this kind of basically wide framed image that you're able to do with that kind of 2-page spread. That I think I was very impressed with a lot of that stuff, art-wise, near the end.
Yes, that is absolutely the best thing about digital manga, is just because, yes, if you're reading in, like, the actual magazines that some of these come out in, it's easier to, like, open up the magazine and, like, see the full spread. But when you get into, like, a tankobon, they're so tightly bound, you're going to, like, break the book if you open it too wide. This was a life changer for me reading One Piece, because Eiichiro Oda uses at least one 2-page spread every single chapter, and usually more than one. A lot of One Piece is written in 2-page spreads, and so I think reading that series digitally is almost like a requirement at a certain point. But anyway, yeah. I'm glad you liked it though, Sean, and I will... when you have time, you absolutely should just go watch the original 2003 anime, because it is such a fucking mindfuck if you know the actual full story.
Because I was very curious. I looked up a little bit about it just because, like, because I wanted to see where it split off and how. And it's like, I didn't realize that it splits off, like, it's seemingly well before who the main antagonist was specifically clear, and so there's a different main antagonist. And I saw that, I'm like, I gotta fucking check this shit out. That seems wild.
It is wild because none of the Promised Day stuff is there. Homunculus are a completely different thing. Like, some of the homunculus characters are there, but the way they are created is entirely different, and the main villain, Father, is not in it. And so a different character is the main villain. I think one interesting thing, though, is that it is much more about Ed and Al's relationship, the original show, because it never gets into that really... Because what Fullmetal Alchemist is by the end in its original story is the story of an entire nation reshaping itself, which, like, that would be, like, the relationship to something like Attack on Titan now, although Fullmetal Alchemist is not as dark. nothing is as dark as Attack on Titan, except certain stretches of reality. No, but like it becomes the story of this nation, this big ensemble. The O3 show has a lot of those characters around the edges, although you never, like, all of, like, Sheen, the, like, Chinese nation, that's not in the O3 show. None of those characters are there.
Wow.
None of that is there. So all of that is out of it. And, like, and remember, I saw that, like a lot of people, the O3 show first. So when I saw Brotherhood and, like, the original manga, it was such a mindfuck, because a lot of that stuff is pretty early in the manga. And it's really funny, like, but because of that, the original show is Ed and Al together basically the whole time, and and the ending is even like a little bit more focused on that. It also, because it doesn't have the full scope of the manga, I think its whole view of Ed as a character is pretty fundamentally different, in that it leaves him in his guilt for the entire show. And it's something he never really overcomes in the O3 series, whereas I think him negotiating and overcoming his guilt what he did to Al is something that happens earlier in the manga. It's not
that's
necessarily
like the midpoint almost, as he starts to sort of like confront that and pivot kind of his perspective on things.
But the O3 show honestly has even kind of a dark ending around that. And then, of course, it ends really with the movie Conqueror of Shambhala. It's the same director as Gundam 00, and it's exactly the same thing, where the movie is the actual finale. And I do think that O3 anime, it's very well produced. It's got great music, obviously phenomenal voice acting. I think it's got really good animation for the time, for standard definition digital animation. I like the movie it's been a long time, so maybe I would feel differently now, but it's a fucking head trip, I think, and it would be so funny for you, Sean, like your only exposure being the manga. There's not many Fullmetal Alchemist fans like that, I feel like, because so many of us
I mean, certainly the other in the West, around. Because the O3 anime was the first thing that was completed. I mean, at all. Yes. But then it was also like, that was like way more readily available over here compared to in Japan. Yeah. Obviously, people would have gotten started reading the manga in the magazine it was originally published in, which obviously didn't happen over here.
No, I believe Viz did not get the rights to the manga until after the anime was being aired here in the States. So the manga did come out after the anime in the United States.
Yeah, no, actually, I have the Wikipedia page up, and you're right. The first volume came out in Japan in 2002. Over here, it came out in May 2005. So the anime had already started airing at that point.
Yeah, Fullmetal Alchemist is a show. Like, if you ever want to do that, I will start rewatching the anime and do that with you, because I have obviously a lot of memories tied into that. I still have my original 13 volumes of the DVDs from Funimation of the O3 show, because kids back in the day, you got anime 3 to 4 episodes at a time, and it was really hard, and Thomas and I would pool our allowance money to get new volumes, and that's how we got through the whole show. But it would literally be like, months in between getting episodes, and it's literally impossible to imagine now, but like that's how we watched anime back in the day.
Yeah, like I would love to do a full episode on Fullmetal Alchemist, because obviously, like, I've got a lot more detailed thoughts, but I don't want to, that's like its own podcast. I want to go into it here, but I definitely need to at least watch some of the anime stuff, because one thing I realized after I finished the series is when I started looking on Wikipedia on like where did the split happen with the original show and stuff, because obviously I didn't want to get spoiled while I was still reading the manga. And then I realized, like, a lot of the, like, names and terminology for things I only know the Japanese version of. So it's like, because I looked at this, it's like, who the fuck is Kimberly? Kimberly? I'm like, you mean Kimberly? Oh, his name's supposed to be Kimberly, not Kimberly. And there's a lot of shit like that where I don't know what I saw, they call the president King Bradley, Führer King Bradley. Okay, like, there's a lot of shit like that I saw that I realized, like, I have no idea what, for instance, Rin Tanjutsu, which is the alchemy that the people of Sheen do, I have no idea what the fuck that is called. Like, there's a lot of shit like that where I have no idea what is this called in the English, like, dub or, like, localization, because this is, like, the only time I think I've ever done that, where I have very little exposure to the English version, so the only version I know at all is whatever the Japanese thing is, which makes looking at the English language Wikipedia feel very weird sometimes.
We have to watch Gundam Build Divers, because it's our next Weekly Suit Gundam, and I've watched a little of it, and I keep not watching more because
Yeah.
We'll talk about it anyway.
Yeah.
But I am very tempted to just go bust out my DVDs and start watching original Fullmetal Alchemist for fun. But maybe later this year we can do an episode. We could do a couple. We could do one on the original anime and one on Brotherhood, and then Brotherhood would allow us to talk about the manga too, obviously. And I think that would be a lot of fun because it's a cool show, and I've always wanted to do that. But anyway, I'm glad you read the manga, Sean, and that you enjoyed it because it's wonderful.
Yep, it's just one I had been waiting on for a long time because I knew I would like it, obviously, and then it just seemed like a good opportunity to actually read the manga because it's very rare that there's something big like that I know I will like, and I haven't seen the anime. Like, it's just like there's not a lot of stuff like that, right? So it's like I can't read the Naruto manga now with like that perspective because I've already seen the anime. Like, most stuff is like that. That's why eventually, probably, if I ever do One Piece, it'll absolutely be through the manga, partially because it'll be way faster. Not fast, but faster. And it's like there's just so few things in that genre that are super big that I haven't seen the anime yet. So it's like that was one of the things that was fun about being able to read the manga first for something like Fullmetal Alchemist rather than coming to it afterwards.
I don't know what you mean about One Piece. 1,015 episodes, which is what we're at now. That's easy peasy. Come on, one a day. You'll be there in 4 years.
Fucking dead by the time I finish it, you know.
Anyway, all right, so that's fun. What stuff do I have, Sean? I saw a movie this week that I just need to sing the praises of and also tell you abso-fucking-lutely need to go see this movie, Sean. It's The Northman, which is the new movie by Robert Eggers, who is the director who did The Witch. But it's the Witch, the movie called The Witch that was spelled The Vavitch, so that's how I think about it, which I know you liked, right?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
You're a fan of the... Yeah. And then he did the movie The Lighthouse with Robert Pattinson and Willem Dafoe, which is a wonderful movie. Have you seen The Lighthouse?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that movie kicks ass. Yeah.
Yeah, that movie. Yeah, it's wonderful. And
kicks ass is maybe a weird way to describe that movie. As I reflect on it briefly, that is a great, very weird, but really great movie.
Which is also how I would describe The Northman. This is not my original thought. I saw this on Twitter a few weeks ago, and I cannot find the original tweet. But someone said this, that The Northman is exactly what you would expect from the guy who did The Lighthouse and The Witch getting $90 million to make a Norse mythology movie. And if that sounds cool to you, then you will like The Northman. It is what it says on the tin. It is a big, expensive production. It is basically this... It's based on the myth that William Shakespeare pulled on to create Hamlet. So it is kind of fun to go through it, and you can see the tendrils of what feeds into Hamlet, because broadly it is about a prince of a sort of like Norse tribe / kingdom, like a Viking, tribe kingdom, whose father is killed by his uncle, and then he has to run away and then come back and try to kill the uncle and avenge his family. But it is, a movie about like myth that is invested in the actual like idiosyncrasies and weirdness of myth in a way I have never seen a movie tackle. Like, it is a film where magic exists. It is a film where fate exists, and those are just things in the movie. And it's not deconstructive of them. It is not like wink, wink, nudge, nudge about them. It is just like this character is like, he learns early on from a seer played by Bjork that he will fight his uncle in a lake of fire, and the movie ends with the two main characters naked in a volcano fighting to the death. And like, that's the kind of movie this is. It is super weird. It is big and operatic and histrionic. There's a lot of, men screaming at the top of their lungs while like, brandishing shields and swords. It is a crazy movie. I loved the absolute hell out of it. It's got a great cast. Alexander Skarsgård plays the main character, and because this is the first movie I think I've heard Alexander Skarsgård using his actual like native accent, because I usually hear him in like British or American productions where he's talking British or American, and he's also doing this kind of deep, gravelly voice, which makes him sound exactly like his father, Stellan Skarsgård, which is kind of amusing. And slightly distracting. It makes sense. He is Stellan Skarsgård's son. Of course, they sound alike, but I've never heard that connection before now. But anyway, he's very good. Anya Taylor-Joy is the main female, the love interest character in the movie. More than just a love interest, but she's the main female character. She's great. Nicole Kidman plays his mom. Ethan Hawke is in it briefly as the dad who is killed. Bjork plays a seer in one scene. It's just got a lot of great actors and very fun to watch. Willem Dafoe is in the movie for a couple of scenes and is amazing. There's one scene in particular with Willem Dafoe that you will never forget. And it is big and brutal and bloody and like histrionic in the way like actual big like mythology is. It is like an epic poem come to life on screen. It makes you want to see like what Robert Eggers would do with the Odyssey or something like that. Like, right, do the Odyssey, but like don't sand it down.
Right.
Like pump it up to 11, you know? Like, I want to see what he would do with fucking Odysseus, you know, stringing the bow, and like how fucking crazy that would be, because that's the kind of stuff this movie gets into. You know, like, the main character is given a sword that they are only able to use at night, and that is like the whole mythology around it. And then there's a section, the movie is split into chapters, and a chapter starts and it says, "The Night Blade Feeds," and that's the chapter of the movie that you're about to watch. And it lives up to the title. It's that kind of movie. And I say that, there's no other kind of movie quite like this.
Yeah.
But you have to, and this is also one, you have to see this in a theater. I just, like, cannot recommend enough. It is a big screen movie, and it is a big sound movie. The sound mix and the score on this film are out of this world. See it in a big screen if you can, but especially if you know of a theater with a good sound system, go see it there. It is just such a cool theatrical experience. It is an increasingly dying breed of movies where it is somehow a crazy auteur got $100 million and made something nuts and got it through the system and probably will never be able to do it again because this movie is probably not going to make its money back because it is aggressively weird. But, you know, those only come along once in a while, and, you know, take them while you can get them because it's a cool fucking thing.
Yeah, no, this movie has actually been on my radar. I need to try to find a time to go to the theater because I do want to check this out, and then Everything Everywhere All at Once. That's the name of that movie, right?
Yes.
Yes, that title I have a very hard time remembering. But yes, both of those I really want to watch. Like, particularly this one, just because Robert Eggers, I've loved both of his other movies. And yes, all the mythology type stuff, all the like Norse, like it kind of Danish shit that the movie pulls from, that like I knew from like interviews and stuff. Yeah, it's obviously it's right up my alley. Like, I don't even need to say that's right up my alley.
Yes.
Anyone who just heard that description is like, this sounds like a thing. I'm the dude who read the fucking like first 10 pages of the J.R. Tolkien version of the Sigurd and Gudrun book, you know, that was written to try to replicate the alliterative verse of the time, but in English. Like, obviously this would be right up my fucking alley.
I knew it would be. And just to anyone else listening, like, this is also a movie that I will say was very accurately marketed. Watch the trailer, and if that trailer you go, man, I want to see that movie, you'll like the movie. I'm very confident in that. It is what it says on the tin, like I said, and it's great, and I love it.
Yeah, I'm curious to see where Robert Eggers goes, you know, because this is not where I expected, you know, in the first place. Yeah, because like I need to find out how the movie got made. It's just like who gave this crazy man a budget? Who saw the lighthouse? Like, let's give this guy a lot of money. Like,
I know.
I want to trust that person, not with like money, but with art. Like, that dude, whoever that person is, did a good job.
Yeah, because there's been some like behind the scenes chatter that this was like a difficult post production, but it doesn't come across on screen. It feels very uncompromised as a version of itself. Like, it feels like the director's cut, you know? But I do believe that it was probably hell behind the scenes, like not having the, like, there's apparently stuff like, you know, the movie starts with the main character as a kid and then you see him as an adult. And, you know, that cut between kid and adult, the studio was like, we need an exact time card saying how many years later it was. And Robert Eggers was like, that's stupid, I'm not doing that. And the final thing that winds up on screen is it just says, years later. And I'm like, this is perfect, this is great. And I think, like, that's how he started, like, winning the fights with the studio. But I agree with you, Sean, like, because I looked this up, The Witch cost $4 million. The Lighthouse cost $10 million, and then this one is $90 million. I really don't know where that came from, who like made that decision, who thought like in our era of like big superhero movies, this is the kind of thing that's going to sell well at the theater. I would love it if we lived in that world. It's just not the world we live in. So who the hell knows how it got made, but I'm glad it did.
Yeah, I'll definitely need to go see that one.
Yeah. All right. And then my other stuff is I've been playing the shit out of Elden Ring.
Before I get to Elden Ring, Jonathan, there is one thing I want to talk about on the podcast that I just think we need to do a check-in on, mostly because there was a big news drop on it on Friday. And I just think we need to talk a little bit about Halo Infinite, because
yeah,
because the state of that game is very dire. I don't know, Jonathan, did you see the roadmap they posted this Friday?
I did. I don't remember all the details. It's so funny. I've played a lot of Halo Infinite. I bought and completed the Battle Pass. I got to level 100. I have all the Battle Pass stuff, and I barely remember my time with that game because it was months ago now. They've added nothing to it, and by the time I left, Big Team Battle was still broken. They'd removed a couple maps from rotation. I mean, that game was in... There's a lot about the fundamentals of that game I still like, but boy howdy, it was in dire straits. And I'll just tell you, I've seen a lot of breathless reporting about how they're fixing Halo Infinite. The roadmap I have seen does not sound like they are fixing Halo Infinite at all. So, Sean, why don't you give me the lowdown here?
Yeah, because so basically, for people who don't know what's been going on with Halo Infinite since launch, is that it launched with its Season 1 content, or I guess technically the Season 1 started before the game even came out, because the Season 1 started late November or whatever, when in their quote-unquote open beta or whatever the fuck they called it, when they just gave the game to everybody. They didn't sell it, I guess technically it was free to play, opened up the store, but then didn't launch the campaign until a week or two after that. But anyways, it has been on Season 1 till 2 weeks from now, basically. So it's like a 6-month first season of content. I say first season of content, I mean, no new content really has been added. There have been some patches. They added in features that mysteriously the audience really wanted, like playlists. Being able to select game modes like Team Slayer in their Halo game was a thing that you couldn't do at launch. So it's they added in some of that stuff. They've done their rotating events like the Tenrai Fiesta event, which I gotta say, the last time I played Halo Infinite was when you were in New Orleans. I remember was when my Game Pass thing ran out, and I think I mentioned this on the podcast briefly, and I played it a little bit because I was booting up my Xbox more to play Master Chief Collection before my Xbox Live Gold ran out, and they were doing the Tenrai event, and the fourth week of that they kind of broke out. And by Tenrai event, I mean just they made a Fiesta playlist available. You can unlock some stuff. And I felt like I had fallen back in time to late 2021, December 2021, because it was they're still doing fucking Tenrai. And because, to be clear, that was in Genshin Impact terms, that was the gap between the second event using Enkanomiya and when they introduced Arataki Ito. It was it was that's 4 updates of Genshin Impact and you're still doing your Fiesta event. So Season 1 of content is kind of a disingenuous thing to call it, because it was there's very little active support for, and there still will not be, for the next 2 weeks, very little, for 6 months. And they said when the game came out that they want their seasons to be 3 months long, but this was going to be a 6-month first season because the game released effectively in an unfinished state. Anyone who's played it knows that. And so they needed that extra time to make up for that fact. Then a few weeks ago, they started announcing their Season 2 stuff. And when they announced that, they said there would be 2 new maps added, 1 arena map and 1 big team battle map. To put that into perspective, 6 months after the launch of Halo 3 and Halo Reach, both of those games had 6 maps added by that point, 2 map packs of 3 maps each. So this is already well behind normal support for a normal.
And they started with triple the number of maps. Yes. I mean, Halo Infinite has the number of maps in Halo Infinite is what you would get in one of the betas in the other Halo games. It's a tiny, tiny number of maps.
Yeah, specifically because they separate out the arena and big team battle maps, are so different that they can't be reused across different playlists. So the total map pool is smaller than any other Halo game, but it's not smaller by a huge amount until you realize that if you're mostly just playing arena, you're only playing on 6 maps or something, or maybe I think 5, because they took one of them out of most playlists because it was an awful map. And then Big Team Battle, there's only 3 maps, and that's it. Whereas classically, and that's because they made Big Team Battle as 24 players total now?
It's fucking terrible.
Yeah.
They've been changing it because Big Team Battle was also broken for so long, and I guess they just couldn't figure it out. So they were experimenting with different sizes to be will this fix it? No. Will this fix it? No. I think it's fixed now, but no one cares because it was also bad. Because, hey, capture the flag doesn't work when there's so many people on every team that you can't possibly capture the flag.
Yeah, and that massively increased player count per map means that those maps have to be so big that they can't be repurposed for any other modes, unlike Valhalla or Avalanche, or those larger maps that were very good for BTB in Halo 3 and in those maps in Reach and stuff. were also good for 4v4 team objective, because they were like, those maps were repurposable across different playlists. In Halo Infinite, that's not really feasible. So if you're someone like me who just doesn't like I don't like big team battle broadly that much in Halo anyways. It was never one of my favorite modes. I really didn't like it the little bit I was able to play of it in Halo Infinite. So if I were to go back to the game, it is them adding one map, which is a new map called Catalyst. Then they also announced that they're adding in new game modes. One of these does sound cool, Last Spartan Standing, which sounds like a mix of like an elimination kind of lives-based mode and gun game. Like that actually sounds interesting. It is actually a different mode for Halo. So it's like, credit to them for coming up with what sounds like a cool new mode. And then two of the other modes are King of the Hill and Land Grab. Land Grab just being a variant of King of the Hill, like it's very disingenuous to call it a different game mode, is the kind of thing that's like, it's basically sounds like it's neutral hill with like multiple zones. Like it's just a variant of King of the Hill. King of the Hill, of course, also should have just been in the game at launch. It's a classic Halo mode that was in in Halo 1 through Reach. It was in all of those games at launch. It was in 4 at launch. And then 5 is when it was no longer immediately available. But they're putting King of the Hill in. That's exciting for Season 2. You can't play it yet, but in 2 weeks you could be able to play King of the Hill in Halo Infinite. They're doing something called narrative events, which has nothing to do with the campaign. They've not explained what that is at all. It's probably going to be like a cutscene or something that gives context to their Season 2 content of like the battle pass and all that shit. Like I have no idea what narrative events means. It doesn't seem like it's going to be interesting. And then they're obviously going to do a new battle pass that will have a new armor core and new unlockables. They've said that they're working on making the armor core stuff less restrictive so that like colors, I don't think they've said that this will be immediately in Season 2, but they're like working on making it so that the colors you unlock for one armor core will also work on other armor cores. That will maybe be a thing you will eventually be able to do in Halo Infinite.
What a thought! Color customization.
Yeah, it's like, wow, if I unlock blue once, I don't have to unlock blue on everything else. Like, that would be great. And that's basically it. And then they said that campaign co-op had gotten delayed because originally it was going to be at the beginning of Season 2. Then they said it was be some indeterminate point later in Season 2. Now, when they announced all of this stuff, that's like not that much new content. It's not enough new content. It's still behind the rate of update that previous Halo games that weren't free to play and weren't games of service and wasn't in that model at all. Those games had much more rigorous support and new content and community events and all that kind of stuff. So it's already, that is dramatically insufficient. But people were at that point operating on the assumption that Season 2 was going to be a 3-month season, like they said they were targeting the rest of their seasons for. And that would then probably put campaign co-op sometime in like June or maybe July, if it's right at the end of Season 2. Well, on Friday, they actually posted a full roadmap for Season 2, which reveals that Season 2 is going to be another 6-month season. It is going to run from May 3rd to November 7th, so it's going to be like a couple of weeks before the first year anniversary of the game's multiplayer release is when Season 2 will end. So all that content I just said, that is Season 2. That is what they're doing for the second half of the first year of the game's release, is 2 new maps, but it's really kind of 1 new map if you don't want to do BTB. It's 3 new game modes. That's really 2 new game modes, and one of them is King of the Hill. It's narrative events, which I don't know what the fuck that is. It's a new battle pass, and then obviously there's going to be like random community things that will happen normally, but they haven't said if they're going to do anything more interesting than just like, we're making a Fiesta playlist available, or here's going to be a swap playlist with a couple of new unlocks you can get. And then they said that campaign co-op is currently targeted for late August, which makes it feel like it's technically true that they said that the campaign co-op is targeted for late in Season 2. It's just that Season 2 is a lot longer than anybody thought it was. So it's like technically that earlier thing they said is not wrong, assuming it actually comes out in late August. But yeah, and then they're saying that they're targeting September for an open beta for Forge. Who knows like what that entails. And then also on this roadmap, they also have in late August target campaign mission replay. So you might be able to use a mission select feature sometime in late August that's currently being targeted on this roadmap. So, 9 months after the game came out, maybe you'll be able to actually reselect missions to get like skulls and stuff like that. And that is the current state of Halo Infinite and the state of Halo Infinite for the rest of the year, basically.
Sean,
Yeah.
I know game development is hard, and I know it is expensive, and it is time consuming, and it is sometimes grueling, and I want to keep that in mind when I say what I'm about to say. If you cannot support a game at a speed that is reliable enough for people to have things to play, you shouldn't be making and releasing that game, and you shouldn't be charging money for it. Like, I feel like that's a pretty obvious fucking statement. If your game is in such dire space, and not just your game, but whatever your production pipeline is in such dire straits that you cannot add a mission select feature for almost a full year after launch, you shouldn't be making and releasing that game, and you shouldn't be charging people money for it. Like, this is the most, like fucking Cyberpunk 2077 released as a fucking fraud. I think people should go to fucking jail for it. It was bad. It got faster updates than Halo Infinite is getting to fix its issues. Now, Halo Infinite started in a better place, to be very clear. Halo Infinite was more playable, better campaign, all of that stuff. It is pathetic. It is weird. The 6-month season thing is just the most, like, admission of defeat thing I've ever seen, because you just can't sustain a season for 6 months, especially if your content is like what in most other first-person shooters or games as service model things would be a week's worth of content, maybe, is now over 6 months. Like, I just, it's pathetic in so many ways. I assume the people making it know that, but like, what I need the tell-all book by Jason Schreier on what the hell happened with this game, because this game was in production for like 7 years. What happened that it's like, it's not just that it came out in the state it came out in, it's that the production pipeline is in such dire straits that they can't make new modes. Like, playlists are hard for them, mission select. Again, I understand game development isn't easy, but so much of this is stuff that is just a part of the industry, and I know that because I've played Halo my whole life, and it's been a part of other fucking Halo games. Like, what on earth happened here? Like, what is still happening that 343 can't make stuff for it? It's just so bizarre.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like, when that, because like I think the game was in a really bad state anyways, but I think the idea of like what they had said season 2 was going to be was a 3-month season. Again, even that's not like amazing unless they changed up and did interesting new things with their community events, which is still possible. There might be other stuff they do. I mean, I think you'd be very dumb to be optimistic about it. But it is technically possible that there are smaller things they can do to be more engaged with the community, and do more active rolling events, which is something that like Halo 3 and Reach and those games were really good at, that could fill out some of that season stuff. But that's like, if it was a 3-month season, you could do that. A 6-month season, again, is crazy. And when I saw that, it just felt like, well, this game is dead. Like, the most hope it has is that we know that Certain Affinity is making some kind of Battle Royale-esque Halo Infinite thing. But we don't know when that is coming out or anything. I think that's mostly just been through leaks, although it's effectively confirmed. It's definitely happening. And that's like the only chance I feel like this game has at kind of coming back. And that's not in a like Halo Infinite comes back. That's like a Fortnite style thing of where it becomes effectively a different video game, and that different video game is popular, but the like campaign and arena of Halo Infinite is, I think, mostly, it's not going to be dead. You will be able to find games and stuff. It's still Halo. It'll have enough of a population to support that. But it will not be an active, thriving, engaged community. It won't be like this big ongoing thing, because it's like, you can't let that community go a whole year on nothing. right? Even games that people like, because people always have this thing of like, oh, other games launch in rough states, but then they're able to bring it back. But it's like, this isn't a game just launching in a rough state. This is a game that launched in a rough state and then has gone like largely unupdated for like a year after its release, with like minimal fixes, with minimal like additions of new content, with minimal new events. It is like way more dire than something even like Marvel's The Avengers, which got more robust support. Or if you want to go with like No Man's Sky, got extremely robust support very quickly and had lots of updates very quickly. We're talking about 6 months and then 12 months after the game's release. You're not coming back from that. Like, currently the game's population on Steam is pretty awful. It's got the current 24-hour peak of me checking it right now on Steam charts is 9,000 players. That is like, in the realm of something probably like Halo the Master Chief Collection probably has something in the realm of like 5,000 players in a 24-hour span. So 9,000 is, and put it into perspective, the game had an all-time peak around its launch of a 24-hour peak of 250,000 players. So it has shed its player base basically about 50% every single month since the game has released, to now be at about 8,000 to 9,000 players playing in a 24-hour peak window, which for a new free-to-play Halo game is miserable, and is currently at about 16th most played games on the Xbox Live most played games chart for the US, because that's split out by region, which is, not the worst thing in the world. Clearly the Xbox version is doing a lot better than the PC version, but 16 that puts it below like the things like the Xbox One version of MLB The Show, which is split out between the Xbox One and the Xbox Series versions, have different rankings. So that's only the Xbox version has a higher population. Destiny 2 has a higher population. Forza Horizon 5 currently is more actively played on Xbox Live than Halo Infinite. And Halo Infinite is a free-to-play, intended to be ongoing live service game. Like, that is tragic for the Xbox platform.
Yeah, I mean, this was kind of its big hope. This was kind of the big hope of Halo as a franchise, its revival. And I think this kind of puts a nail in its coffin in a lot of ways. Like, I don't know how you pull the revival trick again that they attempted to pull with Infinite. Because, Infinite sure did have a lot of, like, positivity around its launch, I think. And a lot of it was undue positivity, which we talked about some. But some of it was due. I liked that campaign a lot. It was enough to put it on my top 10 list in, admittedly, kind of a weak year for games. Sort of like when you put Halo 5 on your top 10 back in the day.
Yeah.
But, like, enough. But there was a lot of positive energy. There was a lot of, like, Halo's back energy in the games press. And nope, it wasn't. There's that Shigeru Miyamoto quote that may or may not be apocryphal. I'm
pretty sure it is apocryphal. I think I read that recently, that people looked into it as like people have been saying that quote in the video game industry forever. It's not like one person coined it. But yeah. But
let's just to say it, a delayed game is eventually good. A rushed game is forever bad. And I think that is generally true. And I think it's like never been truer than in the case of Halo Infinite, where just everything went wrong and they pushed it out. I mean, and it's hard to even like blame Microsoft at a certain point, because you like, at how long were you going to delay this thing before you just had to put it out there in some state, right?
Yeah, I mean, they gave it a whole year delay after it was targeted for the Xbox Series launch, right? Which was like insane that it even got that delay, because it's like this. I mean, the Xbox Series launched with no real exclusive, It's like that was like the jewel in the crown of the Xbox Series launch platform. And it still got a year delay after that. And it clearly needed at least one more year based on what is happening here. If that's the point at which they'll be in beta for Forge, and that's the point at which like campaign co-op will be available, that modes like King of the Hill will be in the game, like that's about where you would say that sounds like a relatively content complete Halo game, kind of. Like, even that would be sparse compared to something like Halo 3 or Reach or even Halo 4. But that would put it a little bit probably above what Halo 5 was like at launch.
Maybe. I mean, because they're still saying stuff like couch co-op is planned for Season 3.
Yeah.
And who, God knows, Season 3 could be another 6 months. That could mean June of next year. Like, what the hell that means. Forge in beta What quite does that mean? Will it actually launch on time? Probably not. Yeah, I've never quite seen anything like it. Because again, it's not a case like Cyberpunk, where I think they just fucking lied to everyone, released a broken game. You know, if you paid for the Halo Infinite, if you got it through Game Pass or whatever, or paid for the Halo Infinite campaign, that is a full finished campaign. Sure. It's sparse in some ways, but like it's a finished thing and it's very good. But I think the multiplayer part is just baffling because, again, it's not like they were reinventing the wheel. In fact, very specifically, Halo Infinite was attempting to be a very back-to-basics Halo thing. There is plenty of Halo to draw upon. I know 343 knows this because they've been working on redoing it all in the Master Chief Collection. Like, what the fuck happened is, I guess, my overarching feeling here.
Yeah, it feels so frustrating because I think one of our main sentiments when we talked about this game on our podcast when it launched was that the game had a lot of promise. There were things about it that were quite good, but like the best thing about it was that it felt like we said this like kind of exactly is that it's like this is the best platform that they have had, right? That there have always been with Halo 4 and Halo 5 like big, I think, kind of gaps in some of the design, particularly for the multiplayer with like Halo 4 and the Call of Duty stuff. And Halo 5, I mean, the campaign in that game was just fucking tragic. So it's like, you know, they've always had rough elements in Halo 4 and Halo 5 that kind of were faulty platforms from which to build the rest of the game. And Halo Infinite, the best thing was that, like, while I have quibbles about some of, like, the philosophy on the weapon design and map placement with weapon stuff that I think could be better, it still I think is the best fundamental platform and the best base they've had for any of their Halo games, and it's like the most promising like starting position for any Halo game since Halo Reach. And then to now be talking about it now 6 months after its launch and to see that platform has been utterly squandered to a like ridiculous degree where again it's like it's sad that Halo 2 had more robust post-launch support, literally, than Halo Infinite. Like I see a narrative online of people being like, God, people are just so demanding of new content so quickly that as soon as they use up that content, they're just like, give me more and more and more. And it's like, you know, that some of that mindset is problematic in the gaming community. This is not an instance of that because by any metric, this is like a ridiculous dearth of content and a like, and basically virtually no meaningful post-launch support whatsoever. And for that to be the state 6 months later and to find out that that's going to continue for an additional 6 months was just a like that strong platform and that strong base that you had is now like molded over and rotten because it's just been left sitting in the fucking sun with nobody attending to it for a fucking year. And there's just nothing, you can't come back from that. And it's very frustrating to see this happening to Halo for a third time. You know, that like 343 Industries has been in charge of this franchise since, technically they've been in charge since 2007, but they've been making the game since 2012 with Halo 4. And for the like 10 years now, this has happened over and over and over again with Halo. It is just like really, really disappointing to come back from like a little bit of optimism and hope from last November and December, and then to where we are now fucking sucks.
I mean, I really do want from Jason Schreier or someone who could do this kind of reporting, the like fucking book length essay on, because what is the studio culture at 343 that this keeps happening? Like, because it has to be something in like the way that studio is set up, right? Like, what is going on that for 10 years they have been getting into these patterns? They've been having problems doing the basics of game design and support, like really basic stuff that they are like seemingly incapable of doing. And I'm really curious where that comes from. It's obviously not a lack of funding. You know, they are Microsoft's baby. They have what they need in that sense. Like, what is the way that studio is established that makes this happen? Because there aren't other Microsoft first-party studios that have this problem. The Coalition on Gears of War has done fine. The Gears of War 4 and 5 multiplayer didn't take the world by storm, but they were supported just fine. And those campaigns were, in the case of 5, acclaimed, you know? Very acclaimed. So, again, what the fuck is happening here? I mean, God, you talk about Halo 2 having DLC, you know, having more post-launch support. I know that because this is going to date us, Sean. Back in the day, the Xbox and the original version of the 360 didn't come with Wi-Fi support. And so if you didn't have a good way to connect your thing to the internet, you know how you got the Halo 2 maps? You went to GameStop and you bought a disc where they released the fucking extra maps on a fucking disc, and you put that in your system and installed the maps. And that's how I played the Halo 2 DLC maps. I got a disc for the DLC.
I've gotten that disc too. The best part was it came with the maps, and it had a deleted cutscene from Halo 2 of like the Marines. I think they positioned it as a deleted cutscene. It was obviously something new that they made. It's like the Marines that crash landed at Hotel Zanzibar. It was like a little like 3-minute Halo short movie in engine with Halo 2. Yes, I'm with you. That I bought that disc too. And yeah, like it's so sad that a game that had to resort to when online video games was such a rare thing in the console space to actually releasing the map DLC as a separate boxed product, and that is more a rapid post-launch support than your free-to-play modern quote-unquote games as a service thing, which is obviously just like a bullshit title that means nothing, particularly in this instance, where games as a service has been a thing in video games since at least the late 90s on PC shooters. It's not a new phenomena. It's just like a weird thing to hide behind, be like, oh, it's a free-to-play games as a service thing. You can't expect too much of us for... we're just this little indie studio making a free video game. How can you expect us? It's like, no, you're making a Halo game. You're backed by Microsoft. Like, again, there's like a pretty specific kind of set of expectations that comes with. And some of those expectations include the post-launch support, where Halo 3, outside of something like World of Warcraft or Genshin Impact or some of those games that are like built on the back of continuous updates, Halo 3 was by far the most rigorously supported game I had ever played for years. Because it had both good map DLC, and it was like the active community events, the really active movement of playlists, the like community screenshots and videos and game types and maps through forwards that were shared and featured on their website and in-game through like an in-game file system, and all that kind of stuff was so cool. And that was 2007. And for 2022, for this game to like, feel like it is like Quake 1 relative to Halo 3 is like fucking crazy.
It is. You know what else is crazy?
What else is crazy, Jonathan?
How good that Elden Ring is.
Yes, let's talk about the exact opposite of Halo Infinite, which is the Elden Ring.
Elden Ring might be the best game ever made.
It's certainly in the conversation. I mean, that's for fucking sure.
Yeah. No, it's definitely at the very fucking minimum. It's in that conversation. We talked about this early when the game came out, Sean. How special it was to every time you would boot up that game and you would pick a direction and go off, you would just find surprise after surprise after surprise. And that basically continues through the end of the game, is what's amazing to me. It is a long-ass game. I'm actually curious to ask how long it took you, but for me it was 117 hours to complete it. I beat it at level 185. So I played this thing very thoroughly. And I definitely, like, near the end, I started, I felt the itch of, like, I would like to be able to go play other things at a certain point. But any game is going to hit that, right? What I never felt was like, oh, this is where the game starts phoning it in. Or this is the area that is less interesting than the other areas. Like, over and over again, I would hit things like Lanedell, and I'd go, well, this is the densest, most interesting area FromSoft's ever programmed in a game. And then I would find the Halig tree, and I'd go, well, this is the densest, most interesting area FromSoft's ever programmed in a game. And just like over and over again, amazing bosses, all sorts of stuff. I was a little low on the final boss fight, but that's been true of most of the Souls games. Sekiro is the obvious exception. But overall, I mean, this game is something historically special.
Yeah, I think in terms of play count and level, I think I'm about the same. I think it was like 120 hours, somewhere in that ballpark.
Yeah.
And I'm with you that one of the most remarkable things about the game is that I think you expect at a certain point there to be the kind of like, a pyramid effect or something where like, you have so much to discover early on that you're constantly running into that feeling of discovery. And then as you play the game more, that becomes less and less common until you get into the home stretch. And then it's like, oh, I now kind of know what the game is and what it's going to do, and I'm not going to be surprised anymore by it. But you're still going to have fun playing it and seeing it to completion if it's a good game. And I feel like that's how most games like this would feel, is it has that kind of funneling down of you early on. It's full of discovery and this is very much to me like what Breath of the Wild felt like. Early on, it's like, oh man, what is happening? oh my god, you can cut down a tree and it'll fall over and you can walk on it. You can, like, the physics systems react in all these ways. And then as you play more and more and more, you see, okay, I know what to expect of this game. I've kind of learned its language. I've learned how to read what it's doing. I've seen the tools, the enemy types, the weapons, the puzzles, like all those things that it has to challenge me with. And now at the end, it's just going through like harder, more complicated versions of those gauntlets, but not surprising versions of those gauntlets. And Elden Ring never hits that point. It's not a triangle. It's like an empty canvas. You know, it's like you are never not surprised by it up to the final moments where you're fighting a weird, goopy, giant Godzilla monster. You're like, what the fuck is going on? Holy shit,
Yes.
what the hell? It is constant. You're just constantly surprised and delighted and intrigued by what it is doing, and it is a game that I think you can never have a full grasp of. You know, like I think it's elusive in that way, in that best possible way, where it doesn't. Even though I've played it to completion and played the shit out of it, did all the optional bosses, and I looked online to like make sure that I wasn't missing anything major and stuff when I was getting close to the end. And I still feel like there's like huge swaths of that game that I'm sure I didn't discover. That probably there are people who haven't discovered at all in the world, of like weird shit just hidden in strange corners. They are reliant on like specific things occurring. It is a game that feels like it is full of like a seemingly infinite amount of mystery. And that is particularly, like, as we are getting older, feels like a harder and harder thing to run into, because as you get older, you know, you've run into stuff before, you've seen the patterns, you know what its influence are and its inspirations, and you can see the signs of where it's going to go. So it's like having something that is so surprising so constantly is a rare experience these days, I think.
Oh, super, super rare. It really does, I think, revivify that sense of childlike wonder you would get in early games like, or early for us games like Ocarina of Time.
Yeah.
Or even something like Super Mario 64, you know, running around a level and being like, where's the secret that I can find here? And Elden Ring explodes some of that logic out into this just absolutely cataclysmically massive game that, again, I probably know its landmass is not technically as big as something like Assassin's Creed Odyssey or something like that, but it is so dense that it feels just like the biggest game ever made. And it feels like a game you're never going to touch every corner of. And I definitely had a moment late in the game, Sean, where I was looking up to make sure I hadn't missed some things. And I did notice some things I'd missed. I'm like, I'm not, some of it I couldn't get to anymore because things had happened in the game. And some of it was just like, well, I will be playing this forever if I don't eventually pick a point and kind of cut myself off, right? And the adventure has to end. And I'm glad I finished it, because there are other things I want to do. But man, I treasured my time with this game. And it really is, it's stuff like, and I do think one of those moments for me of just like awe of like what this game is was when I found the Halig tree, which I did not know was a part of the game. I did not know there was this extra big-ass landmass up on top of the map, you know, in the north. I sure as shit didn't know that I was going to get there through a random portal in this big snow field and all of that stuff, you know? I mean, it's not a random portal. You have to do a little quest and the puzzle in the village and stuff. But I certainly didn't realize it was going to lead me to this whole other, you know, giant area that is not as big and twisty as Lanedale, but has a lot of, like, it's another, like, vertical area with a lot to discover and explore. And at the bottom of it is hidden something pretty special, to say the least. You know, it's just, it's a hell of a thing. I just had so many moments playing this game of the kinds of images that it imagines, the scale it operates on, and the scale it invites you, the player, to play on. You know, when you are riding on torrent around a giant dragon, you know, fighting it on an ice field, or any of the various crazy things you do, you know, I just would over and over have the feeling like, this might be the best game I've ever played. And like, you know, it is pretty rare that you have those experiences. You know, I talked earlier this year about like Persona 5 Royal, and like the tweaks to that game often made me feel like, man, you know, this just might be the best video game. And it is just, you know, now I've had that kind of twice in a row this year. But again, it is still a pretty rare thing to play, especially in a genre that you think you know. FromSoft has made a lot of these at this point, you know? But everything old is new again, I feel like, when you're playing Elden Ring. And, you know, because I also, like, down the home stretch, was really playing with my build a lot. I wound up going heavy on a Rivers of Blood build, the katana that has the incredible corpse piler move that is just so much fun. and that really became the crux of it for me. But I did a lot of reorientation around that. Doing some other stuff with I wound up using the dragon magic actually quite a bit down the home stretch to help me with some of the bosses and various things. I did spec up Melania's sword to try that out, and it wasn't quite, I didn't find it as useful as Rivers of Blood, but I had fun with that. So it wasn't even like the game was static for me near the end. It was just still so alive up through the end of the game.
Yeah, and I was the exact same way with my build. Like, and when I played the game, it was like the totally like unpatched version or whatever. They've done 2 patches since that have adjusted some balance things. They fixed some glitches. They fixed some of the side quest stuff that obviously I was not able to see with forgetting the Hawk lady or whatever. I forget what her name is.
Nepheli Lu.
Yes.
Or Nepheli Lu.
Yes.
And I did get to see her ending, and it's a nice little scene. But yeah.
Yeah, but so when I played it, it was things like the mimic tier had been unpatched. So from what I understand, most of the things that got like quote unquote nerfed are still good. They're just not like as brokenly good.
Yes. Well, because one of them was the move that I used a lot, the bloody slash that you do with a katana. And I still was able to use that. Like, it was, I could tell, the ways it was nerfed is it took a little longer and it did more damage to you. It was still very useful to me. Once I got Rivers of Blood, it was no longer useful because Rivers of Blood, Corpse Piler is better. But yeah, it didn't, I don't think anything that got, like, my brother Thomas still used Mimic Tier as his main summon through the end of the game. And he finished it the other night too, so he's been playing on the latest patch as well.
Yeah, so I was using a lot of the stuff that did it because I used a lot of Mimic Tier stuff. I ended up using the Nagakiba, which is the long version of the katana, which you can get from Yulin. I think his name is. And then I used Melania's sword in my offhand because I was mostly using bloody slash. Although I changed my art of war a couple of times with my Nagakiba. But the thing I liked about Melania was that's the only other katana in the game that is of the same length as the Nagakiba. So it's just like makes your attack range really huge. And then, it was a lot of like blood magic. I used the Swarm of Flies magic a lot.
Yes, I used that too.
Which is very good. The Blood Flame Sword, which is still the coolest name of any spell. Yes, and I just fully leaned into my ridiculous, like, evil anime Sephiroth edgelord boy that I had made with my dragon and blood magic and my big katanas. Like the ability to sort of refine and experiment, swap in new weapons and stuff. Which even just going from like the Uchigatana to the Nagakiba was like an unprecedented move for me in one of these games, where always I would just stick with whatever my main weapon was, or like in Dark Souls 1 I switched it like once, and then Dark Souls 2, 3 I guess it was like I went with whatever I had until I could get the Uchigatana and just use that because I knew I liked the moveset. But partially because in those games things like the upgrade resources were so hard to come by. That you felt like it was impossible to experiment. Whereas with in Elden Ring, particularly in that home stretch, there's so much content and there's so many places for you to go to get materials that you end up with like just a huge backstock of upgrade materials and stuff like that. That is, I mean, a massive backstock. Where I was changing up like what my ranged weapon was. I was switching around with what my talisman or whatever the thing is used to cast faith magic was. My weapons, like being able to swap out arts of war. Like Elden Ring is so much more open in that regard in its design, and is so much more giving of materials to the point where, like, other than that final upgrade jump or like kind of those last 2, it's like trivially easy in the last like 30 hours of that game to get any weapon you want to, up to the point where it's like incredibly good and you can use it effectively. And that's one of the things that's fun about it, is that you are constantly able to experiment with its design, experiment with your build, experiment with different weapons, different spells, whatever you want, and you're not like punished for doing so, which is what I kind of feel like the Dark Souls games always had, this quality of like you're so limited on your resources that you don't want to spend anything on the off chance that the new build you're trying to make is actually shitty. Whereas in Elden Ring I never had that concern.
No, not at all. I had by the end, let's see, I had almost all the main katanas leveled up to the top. Like, I had a good set of, like, just the special weapons, the ones that need, like, a somber ancient dragon smithing stone as your final one. I had Melania's leveled all the way up. I had the bloody, what's it called? The blood sword. Rivers of Blood. I had Rivers of Blood leveled all the way up. I had my Nagakiba and my Uchigatana all the way up. I had my black bow is the one I used as my ranged weapon when I used, although I didn't use arrows much by the end, but I did level that one all the way up. I had for my incantations, I used the dragon seal, and I had that leveled all the way up. So like, you know, and then some other ones too that I experimented with on the side that I got way high. And you're right, it is very easy, and it's very encouraged to like get creative, and it would be, you know, there are some tough motherfuckers near the end of this game in terms of bosses. I feel like some of the hardest stuff FromSoft has ever programmed, and the answer usually for me was like getting creative with it and coming up with ideas and trying them out, and, you know, kind of having fun with the chemistry set of it all. And it is just consistently so rewarding.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that like distinguishes it from the previous Souls games, right? That I love what FromSoftware has done with like Sekiro is your super hardcore refined action version of this, and Sekiro still has the best bosses because that game is like the way that game is designed lends itself to good boss fights in a way that like Elden Ring, particularly I think in that home stretch, has the Dark Souls' issue of like some of the boss fights feel a little bit mushy or a little bit cheap because they can't be designed around a narrow set of abilities, you know, the player has. It has to be designed around, here's a million things the player can do, so you have to build a boss that can withstand that to a certain extent. But the benefit of that is the player can do a million things. And I think allowing that and the open world giving you the like the resources and like the space to experiment in a way that like is just not, that space just doesn't exist in the other Dark Souls games because they're, you know, certainly relative to Elden Ring, way more focused, way more relatively linear experiences than what this game is. And that opens up that aspect of the design that I never really cared about in the Souls games. And it's why, like, for me, I think Sekiro is, like, easily a better game, for me personally, than any of the other FromSoftware games. The only other FromSoftware game pre-Elden Ring that is even close to Sekiro is Bloodborne. But that's because I didn't care about the fact that, oh, technically you could play the game in a different way, that technically I could use different weapons and magic and stuff, because to actually reasonably do that, you had to play the whole game again from the beginning, and that's a big ask. Whereas with Elden Ring, that's not necessary. You can fucking do whatever the fuck you want, whenever you want to, and play however you want to play the game, and the game does not restrict you in that way. And so it makes that design thread that's existed since Demon's Souls in these games that I've never cared about and has never really worked for me personally. In Elden Ring, it's like one of my favorite parts of the game, and it's where like I think it could sit at least side by side with Sekiro, if not maybe even better than Sekiro. But it's certainly like those are like FromSoftware's two best games because they both epitomize the two different design philosophies that they like to play with. And Elden Ring just so exploding all that shit off in its own direction is really cool, and I think it might make like some of the other Dark Souls games hard to go back to in retrospect because like it's addictive the amount of freedom you have in Elden Ring to do whatever you want.
Yeah, like I still want to go back and play Bloodborne, and I think Bloodborne being a little more along the Sekiro track will make it easier to go back to, but I really want... One day, they'll do the 60 FPS patch, please. I'm waiting for it. But no, I do want to play that one, but like, I definitely... My hunger to like go play Dark Souls 3, which is the other one I missed, maybe is lessened a little bit, although I would still like to give it a try, because I know there's still obviously tons of stuff I love in the Dark Souls games, but I do think, yeah, Elden Ring is like the nth degree of all the best parts of that game, you know, because I think, you know, when Elden Ring was announced as a big open world game, my only concern at all was that, but you know, one of the things I love about Dark Souls is sort of the Metroid-esque intricacy of the world and like the exploration and finding out like the geography of the world and how it all links together. Does that get lost a little bit in the open world thing? And the answer is an emphatic no. It gets enhanced because of the way they've designed this game and the just sheer joy in both small, tightly confined areas. Like Lanedale is not small, but it is definitely tightly confined. And we talked about this last week of like discovering the like way Lanedale is all laid out. That is just such a joyous moment when you finally kind of unlock the maze in your mind. Mm-hmm. And that is on the micro level. But then there's the macro level of just the way the whole world is laid out, you know, and going from, you know, the Limgrave where you start, to Caelid, to Liurnia, the areas to the south of Limgrave, then all the way up to the north, and you've got the Giants area, but the Giants area also has the consecrated snowfield, which you can see, but you can't just go jump in from the, mountaintop of the Giants. But when you figure that out, that's amazing. And then you got the Halig tree over there, and then you've got the big fucking, Erd tree that you can see from any point in the game, and eventually that's your destination. And all of that kind of stuff is so joyous. And so it takes all those things I loved about Dark Souls and really explodes it out and dials it up to 11 with, as you say, an expansion of the logic of sort of gamic freedom that it has, in a way that makes it, I think absolutely, it's an extraordinarily different game from Sekiro, but those are absolutely the two jewels in FromSoft's crown, because they so epitomize the two sorts of things that they are so good at, and they feel very distinct now, where I very much want another Sekiro or a game like Sekiro from them. But I like that they've got these two paths, and they are such, jewels in the crown.
Yeah, I think the other main area that Elden Ring's design and the open worldness and all that does, that kind of opens up things that the other Dark Souls games had that I didn't personally care much for, is like the lore aspect in the story and the like boss characters and stuff like that, which has always been a thing, obviously, in Dark Souls. And we've talked about in previous podcasts, like the mythology side of it with Elden Ring, and it's like the cultural and historical specificity of what it draws on, which I think is like only heightened and enhanced throughout the whole game. And it's like the Celtic and Nordic and Germanic mythological inspirations that make up the game's kind of like mix of major elements it pulls from, is still like the best of any of these games, and I love that stuff. But it's also, I think, specifically, there's a shift when you get to Leyndell, where the game moves into that mode where now you're dealing like directly with like the demigods, and you have a better frame of reference for how they fit into things. And that aspect of the game's story I also love, and I think this is my favorite cast of characters of any of these games. Again, like Sekiro is a slightly different thing, where Sekiro gets to be a more like direct story because it's more focused. But in terms of the big lore and like these big kind of mythical figures that you're interacting with, or that you're sort of like uncovering the history of everything that happened with these entities, that's how all the Dark Souls games have designed. But I never really, cared much about like Gwyn in Dark Souls 1. And I know that people got way into like Solitaire in Dark Souls 1, but that, like, none of that stuff ever really jumped out at me as being particularly interesting. Like, I think it was good and I liked it as nice flavor, but wasn't something I was like very like sort of enraptured by and thought about a lot while playing the game. Whereas in Elden Ring, working out the relationships between like Marika and Radigan, and then like their children, and Radigan with Renala, and like all the family tree and the golden lineage, and then you've got the two Omen people like Mog and stuff like that are descendants of that golden lineage as well, and piecing together like the conspiracy of the Knight of the Black Knives and all of that, and like the mysteries at the heart of this like fucked up pantheon, basically, which is the core of most mythologies. Is there's some very weird fucked up family dynamics going on with your pantheon of gods, and that they're all kind of, they hate each other and they love each other, and they're vying, and there's like incest and self-cest and weird shit going on, and all that kind of mixed together in this like mythological pot. And I think this game is so successful at making those entities feel like vivid characters that when you encounter Melania, there's such a buildup because you've been reading about this lady the whole game, and you saw the remains of that battle in Caelid, and you saw what she did with Radon, and you kind of, and then for me, like, I had already found Mikola in the Moog stuff and all that, and so like piecing together those relationships makes it, in that back half when you're encountering a lot of these characters for the first time directly, I think there's so much more weight and personality to that than when you fight the dragon in Dark Souls or stuff like that. There's only a couple of things in Dark Souls, the other Dark Souls games like Artorias, that have some of that to me, whereas it's like every single major boss character in this game, I think by the end of it, you have some real like personal connection to, and their narrative.
Yes, and it's just the overall presentation is so amazing. It really saves all of its best cutscenes and I think individual images for the end. Other than there's some stuff you get to earlier, like Radon, that is on that same level. But like when you get to Leyndell and then all the northern areas and stuff like that, and the cutscenes around Melania and Moog, and everything that happens with the Erd Tree, and all of that stuff. It is just a almost endless procession of just some of the most like breathtaking visual ideas you've ever seen. And the scope of like the entities you're playing with, you just like feel in your gut, you know, while you're playing. Even if it's a boss like that you have an easy time with, like it's the one at the end of after you sort of set the Erd Tree on fire and you go to that area sort of in the sky, the remains of like
the crumbling
the crumbling area of Farad or something. Yeah, and the end of that is like Mikia. I forget the name of but it's
Malekith,
the blade.
The black knife.
Malekith. Yeah, the black knife. That was an easy boss for me. I beat him very easily. It still felt the weight of like what I was playing. And one of my favorite images in the entire game is after you get him down to half, you know, he puts the fucking sword in his hand and then pulls out this death blade from it. You know, it's just in stuff like that that's just incredible.
Yeah, and with Malekith, it's, you know, the fact that if you've been doing any of the Beast clergyman stuff like that's Gronk, right? That he
right.
That's one of a good example of where they kind of build more direct narrative elements with the characters throughout the whole game, so that like you have a better context for them when you encounter them as boss characters. Because yeah, like when you run into, it's like, oh fuck, it's fucking Gronk. And then he's Malekith, and then if you read like a bunch of the descriptions on his items and stuff like that, you find out that he was Marika's brother, and he is to Marika what Blythe is to Ronnie and stuff like that. Like he's her like a bodyguard or something basically, but also her brother. Like all that like stuff, it registers well as mythology, almost kind of like the Northman stuff you were saying. That feels like it connects well. That in this very mythological or mythical sense. I think maybe my favorite character in that regard for like the cutscene and just like the vibe of the whole thing is Rickard, the serpent, you know, god, who is like Rickard, who sacrificed himself to some giant serpent. And so you fight the serpent in the Volcano Manor, and then when you get in like to his second form, he has a giant face on the bottom of the serpent, and he pulls a giant bloody human bone sword that looks like the tail at the end of Shin Godzilla out of the serpent's mouth, and it's like, let us feast on the gods or whatever. And he's you know, given himself up to a serpent to try to give himself the power to kill the other demigods and become the next Elden Lord. Like that feels so much straight out of like some like Ragnarok type shit from Norse mythology that it registers, it hits me so hard in that like myth loving part of me that it has such command of the imagery and the ideas and the fundamental like core in your gut kind of symbolism that myth works on, that I think anytime one of those cutscenes happens, I kept up just being like, oh my god, I can't believe this. This is the best fucking thing in the world.
The Rickard one is, we'll talk about that later. That's an amazing, I fucking love all of that. You're so right. I mean, you know, since we're never getting another Game of Thrones book, I would love if George R.R. Martin would just like write up all of this lore into a book for us and put it out. He did that with all of the like Targaryen backstory. It's a book called Fire and Blood, which is basically what's being used for this new HBO series they're making. That's the Game of Thrones spinoff. Just spend some time, write that for us. If they put out a fucking 900-page lore Bible of Elden Ring, oh my god, I would buy 5 copies. You know, 100%. Just to like dive through it all. That would be so fun to have. But it's so cool how it, you know, is realized here. And yeah, it's constantly conjuring images and places and ideas, you know, visually and aesthetically and narratively that like could be a hook that would sustain a different 100-hour game. And it's just one little part of this pantheon that you get here. Because, yeah, all of that Volcano Manor stuff and the different, like, sort of, like, corpses reaching out in this very Lovecraftian sense, kind of the same way Shin Godzilla uses it at the end, right? And you have that sort of visual motif that builds throughout that whole area. And then you get to Rickard's, you know, arena and all of that stuff. And it's the entire aesthetic of that is just, that alone tells a story that it's not even that you have to piece it together or know how this all happened. You just feel it in your gut, and there's a lot of that in Elden Ring. Yeah,
and it's just, you're constantly confronted with those kinds of images, and you said it's like, it's any of them could just be like their own last boss that like the whole game is hinged on, you know, like even Godric, the first major boss that most people fight, right, with his whole grafting and that concept, like that in and of itself feels like that could be the entire premise of its own game, and they're having more enemies that are grafted. And did you ever go like find the portal that takes you back to the kind of little starter area where you die at the beginning of the game?
No, I didn't.
Yeah, there's not much there. There's a little bit of stuff you can do if you get back there. But like it put into context for me because you can see some environmental clues of that. Like one of the things that Godric was doing was, since that's where the Tarnished came in, he was sending those big grafted monsters to kill the Tarnished and bring their bodies back to him so he could graft more people onto him.
No, I did get to this area.
Yeah.
I'm remembering it now. Yeah, this is a big game.
Yes.
Yes, I do, because I sawed off the coast while I was sort of finishing up the map, and I realized, yes, that's where that was. Yes, okay.
Yeah.
That's so cool. Yeah.
And so, yeah, I just think there's so many little narrative moments like that that to me are like, in any other Dark Souls game would have been like the big discovery I had of like, oh my god, this is how this is happening with this thing. And it happens with like, I think every single one of the bosses in this game. I have multiple moments that feel like that. And it's just a real credit to their design that narrative exploration and the characterization and the personality and the history of that world is so thoroughly fleshed out, that as open as the game is, and how you can encounter things in like any order from any direction with any kind of context, that it registers so well. It's so much more open and broad than any other Dark Souls game, but it leads to like the more frequent and powerful kind of think like personal and intimate narrative discoveries for the player. And that's like a real insane feat of game design and narrative design.
I mean, I would argue that's why so much of the story hits so hard, is because it is so open. You know, there was the debate early on of stupid people on Twitter being like, why doesn't it have a quest log to do all the work for me? No, that's why it works. That's why this game works, is because it is not a to-do list the game gives you. It is a world that you make of what you will. Like okay, so my favorite narrative beat in the entire game actually does not involve the demigods. It is the stuff with Hugh, the blacksmith, in at the round table, and I forget what's the name of the woman who does the spirit tuning. Do you remember?
I think.
Yeah, Rodrika. You know, Hugh is there from the beginning. Rodrika is only going to be there if you find her in that little shack and do this whole little quest line with her and eventually bring her back and talk to her and talk to Hugh and start this relationship with them. And because Rodrika is one of the first NPCs in that vein you're going to encounter in the game, that is something that stretches across like 100 hours of the game. Is, you know, spirit tuning is only a thing you have access to because you explored and did stuff with this character, self-motivated, not because at any point you were given a to-do list and told to go do this thing. And so you feel like you have a very personal connection with Rodrika, because the point where she becomes what is, in a game design sense, one of your merchants, basically, right? One of your key, like, upgrade persons. That only exists because you kind of formed in the game this personal relationship with her and with Hugh and triangulated all of that. And then at the far end of the game, once you set the Erd Tree on fire, you go back to the Round Table Hold. And at that point, almost everyone is gone from the Round Table Hold, because the whole point of the Round Table Hold is that it's a place where people sort of cross paths and then go off to die, right? And so you've had all these colorful characters come through this place and go off and die. And the last two that are left there are Hugh and Rodrika, and that's it. And they are staying there because Hugh, his goal in life is to make a weapon that will slay a god, and he has done that, and he believes in you, and he says, just let me once call you Lord, because that's what you are to me. And I'm tearing up at the fucking FromSoft game, which has made me feel many things over the years. I love these games. They've never quite gotten me that emotional. And Rodrika decides to stay with him because this is the guy who taught her and gave her life another purpose, and they're going to stay there till the bitter fucking end. And no other open world game can do something like that, can make me feel something quite like that, because in other open world games, your relationships are so much more mediated by layers of gamic design that I think get in the way of feeling like a part of the diegesis. And in this game, this is all so player motivated. Just the choice to like go talk to these people who, again, in any other game would just be the merchants there to fulfill this one game design function they've been given, but you are allowed and encouraged to view them as people. But again, it is player motivated. All of that leads to these moments of just real kind of emotional revelation that so complements the overall themes of the game, which are themes FromSoft has been playing with forever, but are just so finely felt here. And it's stuff like that it's gonna be like, I think the 1-2 punch of the last 5 years of Breath of the Wild and then this, every other open world game is going to have to step up its game, because I can never go back and do the fucking Ubisoft fetch quest. I can never go back and do the long goddamn string of side quests on the side. It's just, this has shown me what games can be, and it's shown me how inefficient and insufficient so many of what games have been.
Yeah, I think for me, in that regard, some of the narrative stuff that is I mean, the most effective narrative stuff to me is the Ronnie stuff. But that's effectively,
it's so good.
That's the main story of the game, and it's one of the things I love about it is like the main, what is, inarguably, I think the main story of the game is something that is incredibly easy to miss in 1,000 different ways, either to miss or not be able to continue along the way. Because there's nothing about the Ronnie stuff that is immediately earmarked as this is the main story of the game, but 100% is, and clearly, and I assume you picked the Ronnie ending at the end,
Yes.
right? Yeah, like that's obviously, if you've looked up the other endings, like that is obviously in FromSoftware fashion, that is like the ending of the game, and the other ones are like, I mean, they're not all bad endings per se, but they're like insufficient or incomplete feeling endings compared to the Age of the Stars ending. So we'll go into the Ronnie stuff because obviously it's huge, but kind of parallel to the Ronnie stuff, I think the other track I really was invested in was Fia's whole storyline.
Yes, God, I love Fia's storyline. Oh my god.
And how that, like, I think the whole arc of that, and obviously people will probably encounter this in slightly different ways, but I think the main way, this is how I encountered it, is like you start with D in the Round Table Hold and doing some of that beast stuff with him, because he's the guy who kind of, through him you get to Karank and all that. So it's like early on you kind of start that relationship with D, and I'm like, yeah, this guy's pretty cool, he seems like a good dude. And then eventually, while you are investigating all the weird shit with like the weird corpse below Stormvale Manor and all that with Rogier, who was D's friend, and then Rogier is fucking paralyzed because his legs are dead in a like capital D dead sense, and rotting, that then D is murdered by Fia, and you stumble upon that in the Round Table Hold, and she's just like, hey, thanks for helping me out, buddy, anyways, peace out, and she just fades away into mist, and you're left there with D's dead body, and you can talk to Rogier about it, and so you're like simultaneously investigating the Night of the Black Knives, what was going on with that, what is like all the weird shit going on, and Fia kind of like inserts herself into that story from the side out of nowhere as this weird deathbed companion who embraces you, which is obviously just like a metaphor for sex, and then encountering her again in the deep underground while you're on the Ronnie path, which is how, because they happen in basically the same area, and rerunning into her and having this like different perspective of learning that, having a sense of like, when I first encountered Fia, I thought, oh, she's just like the generically evil NPC that murders another NPC in the hub area, because that's in like every one of these games. It's a trope, like Patches. In all these games, there's a dude who, if you do certain things, will start murdering NPCs in your like Firelink Shrine or wherever it is for that specific game. And I just assumed that that's what Fia was, and she was just a bad person. And then when you get to the end of her storyline, I think realizing that, no, in many ways, the people who live in death and what they're trying to do, I think is like the other best ending. It's the other like most real ending to the game, because what they're trying to do is to create mortality, right? They're trying to impose destined death, which is, of course, sounds very bad in a fantasy thing, and then you realize, well, that's just the world we live in, is in a world of destined death where all things die, and it is engraved into the order of existence. She's trying to bring about an end to the sort of like the order of like decay and entropy that is inherent to the weird like eternal world that these people live in, where nothing can die for realsies. And that arc of coming around and like being away from her for so long, learning so much about the world and the way in which it's fucked up, and then encountering her again, and it's all still themed and like built around imagery and like concepts of death, in a way that is typically would be like extremely negative. And you know, she you know, symbolically sleeps with, or like, you know, has sex with a giant demigod corpse that whose soul is dead because the rune of death was used to kill Ronnie's body and to kill Godwin's soul, and so he is the personification of death in and of itself, and through that she is able to give birth to a rune of death. All of that is the most hardcore heavy metal evil shit you could possibly think of in a fantasy world. But for me to like earnestly feel when I reach that point of, no, like this is like, if depending on how this Ronnie shit works out, this might be the ending I go for. And that whole journey I thought was crazy how effective and compelling it was.
We apparently did that journey in completely different orders, because the way you laid that out was very different for me, but obviously came to the same ending. Like, I did not do a lot with D, because I found Garank and that whole area and some of the beast stuff not like completely separate from D.
Wow.
I found it because I was exploring Kaled, and there was a place that I thought was something else, and I wound up going and finding what wound up being Garank and that whole area. And then I spent a lot of time in that area because it's a really good early grinding spot, because all the enemies there drop like 1,300 souls.
Yeah.
There's obviously, when you get to the north, there's way better stuff, but for a long time it was the best spot I had. So I had done a lot of that stuff kind of separate from D, and even kind of forgotten about him. But I had been doing some of the Fia stuff, because I just think all the imagery around Fia of like, you know, when she holds you and like your character gets down on one knee and that whole thing is just such a like haunting, beautiful image in this kind of like gothic painting sense. And then and then it was like some of the stuff around when you get to Nokrin and there's the boss near the end. There's the big twin gargoyles or whatever they're called. The twin, it's like an update of the Bell gargoyles basically from Dark Souls. And that room winds up being where you get in Fia's coffin to like journey away and all of that stuff, right? But there's a guy sitting there on the way in who is like Dee's brother. And that's what actually led me back around to some of the different Fia stuff. But yeah, I loved all of that. I think the entire idea of death that it plays with, and because I will say, I have a less concrete sense of a lot of these narrative things than you do, Sean. I think you wound up going in and probably reading more and like figuring out more of this yourself than I did. I have a much more sort of like emotional liminal sense of a lot of this, but still the whole thing where she, you know, lies with death, and then you go to get the death rune, you hold her like dead body again. It's just one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen in a game. It's so haunting and unforgettable. And so many of the places it takes you to. I love the like dragon enemy you fight there in her final boss. Like, there's just, that whole questline sort of blew me away. And so many of those areas underground, like Nokrin, that they lead you to. You know, the whole idea of getting in the coffin, and that's what like takes you away. Which is a very FromSoft thing, but I think has an emotional resonance here it hasn't had before.
Yeah, and it hits the like that mythology piece again, right? Of where it's like, I mean, it's in every single mythology is like the hero traveling to the underworld to like bring something back. And I think the way that is like utilized and in some way flipped on its head to again make like death this like noble thing, even when it's steeped in the kind of necromantic, like dark fantasy trappings that Elden Ring uses for it. The idea that like the people called those who live in death, with all those words being capitalized in the subtitles, being in my mind like legitimately a group with like a good purpose, that like I'm like, yeah, no, you're right. I think that like destined death isn't a thing that should be sealed or locked away, and clearly the fact that like there's this weird almost curse of immortality in the lands between, that you know, things can't die, people are eternal, and has led to this just sort of seemingly endless decay of the land. That destined death is a thing that is needed, and of course like conceptually the stuff that Ronnie does in her ending achieves similar purposes, just I think probably more broadly speaking than what the Fia ending gives you.
But I definitely was on the same path. It was, for me, the ending was either going to be Fia or Ronnie. Those were the two that I made sure that I had everything I needed before I did the ending, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So, okay. A million directions we could go with this. Should we dive into the Ronnie? Why don't you kick us off?
Let's talk about our queen. Our, you know, if there's one thing I just want I just want to serve a queen, right? Like it's the Haman
Right.
Karn thing. It's like I just
Yes.
need it. It's like there's something about that whole dynamic of your relationship with Ronnie and learning about her and like her slowly coming to trust you, and then the ending of her, when she calls you her dear consort, and
Yes.
you go off together into the unknown reaches of the stars to like separate existence or whatever, is like it is by far the most emotional stuff, like the most emotional I've ever felt connected to any of these games. And particularly so much of the imagery around Ronnie and her journey, particularly the wedding imagery, right? That you near the end of her quest line, I guess you should back up, like it just like sort of go through like broadly what all the Ronnie stuff is of her being an Empyrean, right? So she is one of the heirs to sort of like the throne, broadly speaking. She is one of the demigods, but she doesn't want to be one. And so she's trying to sever her connection to Marika and all of that stuff, and specifically to the two fingers. The literal two fingers, again, is not just a metaphor or like an abstract concept. They're literally two giant gnarled fucking gross ass fingers that she is trying to get out from under the like subservience of, and they're grooming her to be a potential successor to Marika, because it's at least her and Mikola and Melania and maybe some of the other demigods are also Empyreans that can can succeed to the Elden Throne and all that shit. And so she doesn't really want any of that. And so she has hatched this whole plan that involves destroying her body with the Rune of Death so that she can't be connected, right? Like severs her physical connection to like the Erd tree and the two fingers and all that shit. And so that's one of the reasons why the Night of the Black Knives happens, is one, it kills Godwin's soul. And then two, it destroys Ronnie's body and grants it true death, and she transfers her consciousness into that puppet. And then that's where you kind of like intersect with her, is after that point, right? And so she has her whole group of different people, like Blythe. I'm blanking on the giant's name, but the giant
E.G.
Yeah, E.G. Who is awesome. Then you have what's the wizard?
Celovus.
Yeah, Celovus, who's a creep and a fucker. But you've got those people, so you've got this whole little cast of characters, and following her on this mission, her trying to finish severing herself from the relationship with the two fingers so that she can bring about this age of the stars, which is what her ending is so interesting, of the kind of little machinations of getting the pieces of like the death rune from her body to make another black knife so that she can ultimately use that black knife to murder the manifestation of the two fingers that like is in charge of her or whatever. And there's the whole part where you have a little doll of Ronnie that like talks to you, that you have to talk to multiple times to get it to trigger, which is one of the best things, because you have to kill one of the other like beast hunter things or whatever the fuck those things are called, like what Blythe is, that's hunting her down in Necron. But so that the culmination of all that stuff, you go on this long mission and you go on all your adventures with Blythe, and a lot of that stuff is stuff we talked about in earlier podcasts when we were both doing it, connected to Radon and all that. But then this
takes place over dozens of hours.
Yes.
It's interspersed through basically the whole game.
Yeah, which is the thing that makes it feel like it's the main story, because it takes you to so many points along the map before you have to do the lame doll stuff. And then the end point of that part of the quest that sort of then gives you the thing you need to have to trigger her ending is one of those striking images in any From game, which is coming into that dilapidated like shrine or whatever, and then going underground, and then seeing her kind of vacated puppet next to the two fingers that have been completely gored, and her puppet is sort of like covered in blood, and there's blood all over the ground, and you find her. And as a part of that quest, there's also this whole thing where you got a hint about a ring that's like in the chest at Renala's place in the academy, right? So you find that ring and you bring that ring, and that ring was a thing given to her, if you read the item description, for her to give to her consort as an Empyrean, because all Empyreans have their consorts. That's who the Elden Lord is, right? So that's like what Godfrey, the first Elden Lord, he was Marika's consort, right? So she was given this ring by the Two Fingers to give to her consort that makes you then like legitimately an actual candidate, become the Elden Lord. And so you have that ring and you put it on her finger. And so that whole scene of you kneeling next to her vacated puppet body, putting the ring on her finger, like with everything covered in blood, and this like ominous manifestation of like order and the gods and the greater will that has been gored behind this, is just such a vibrant shot. And the idea that in a FromSoftware game that like you get married, right? it's like a core part of the story is you wedding this witch lady. It's such a like weirdly tender story with like a weirdly emotional core that like I got legitimately really attached to Ronnie. And like and even if it ended up being a thing where I found out that, oh, the Ronnie ending is like a red herring, or it's like it's secretly the evil bad ending to the game, I wouldn't have given a fuck. I've been like, I don't care if this brings about destruction of all life in the universe. She's my fucking queen. I'm her consort. Like, we're going, man. I put the ring on that finger. I'm seeing this through to the end, you know? It's like, again, man's got to live up to his promises. It's like, this is how it goes. And like the way it was able to like hit me so deep in my core, this relationship with Ronnie over this like weird dozens and dozens of hours of like intersecting that quest in different ways. And the fact that there was like maybe a solid 40-50 hours of the game I played after getting that point of that quest line. Because that was before I did any of the Lane-Del stuff. I finished the Ronnie stuff. That was still, I carried that torch the entire time. I'm like, this is why I'm going there. I don't give a shit about anything else. I don't care what anyone else tells me. It's like, I put the ring on that finger. I'm seeing this through to the end. And that relationship is, I think, one of the most memorable character relationships I've had in a game because of how like natural and weird and organic it felt.
Well, now this just made me want to go play the whole fucking game again. It's so good.
Yeah.
But yes, oh my god. No, you're so right. You're so right. You know, this is why the Mobile Suit Gundam character I identify most with is Masha Cello, because he is the one who has no chance with Queen Haman Karn, but he will die for her. I understand. He's my boy. I want to be Masha. I just want to have proximity to her godliness. No, but you're so right, and it's just this series of unbelievably striking images and characters that all come together. This crazy quest that takes you to so many places in the world, as you say. There keep being like new stages in it that like I didn't know about and I would get to and I would be blown away by. I know Thomas, my brother, is going to like this part of the podcast because he, I know, feels very similarly to you, Sean, about Ronnie and how you know, you're committed. You get married to her fucking corpse, basically. Yes, no, it's unbelievable stuff. And yeah, I think the thing that hit me about the ending, with the Ronnie ending, has this incredible imagery, like with where the moon like rises above you in this like watery field. I've taken a screenshot of it and made it one of my wallpapers now on my Mac. I have a rotating set of wallpapers, and that one is an amazing image. But it doesn't end on a big image. It ends on your hands reaching out and touching in this like medium close-up of the hands, which is an echo of you reaching out and like putting the ring on her finger, earlier in the game. And I just love that's the note the game ends on when you go with what frankly is the true ending. It's just those two hands clasping, and then it cuts to Elden Ring, big letters.
Yeah, and a big part of it with Ronnie is it's just an all-time great character design. I mean, it's just such an incredible look of she's very distinctive, is the white kind of witch outfit with the big hat, and then the like because she's literally a doll, right? So she has these like very delicate porcelain doll-like features. 4 arms, which is the FromSoftware touch, right? Is that she's got 4 arms for seemingly no reason at all. That I think that is like one of the things that makes it like weirdly alien and very like striking. And then the coloring of it, of the white clothes with like the blue porcelain doll features and the blue hair and the glowing blue eyes and the weird, because she is a soul possessing this thing, there's like this ghostly apparition that sometimes like sort of creates almost like an outline around one side of her face. That everything about it, and then the vocal performance, which I'm not sure who does the voices. Let's try to look that up. But she also gives, I think, my favorite vocal performance is Amy Fionn Edwards. That looks like a Irish name. And she gives my favorite vocal performance in any of these games, because the like otherworldly nature of her voice and the kind of soft, confident power that she exudes, and the kind of dedication to seeing this through to the end of, even if she understands it's going to be hard, she refers to it as her dark path, that she's so committed to it. It just immediately strikes that Haman Karn note in a slightly more sort of soft way. It's not as intense as something like a Haman Karn, but that the conviction of the character is so charismatic that comes through in the posturing and the body language and the voice, that it just immediately makes you want to like follow this character and like believe in her.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I do think it's the thing that, because she has that cast of characters too, right?
Yes.
And when you finish up her quest line, those characters die one by one, and it is so like powerful and hard. Like, you know, Blythe you basically have to put down because he becomes a rabid beast, and Celephus gets murdered because he's a piece of shit. And then you've got E.G., who winds up just as this like kind of stone giant in the middle of the road when you go back and visit him. All of that is, you know, and that's a microcosm of so much of what the game does with so many of its characters, because this is basically about, you know, this game broadly is about an immortal world having death sort of visit it for the first definitive time, right? And so it is about this entropy and decay. But I think it is done so powerfully because of how all those characters are connected to you.
Yeah, and the fact that that this mission has been long ongoing before you got there, and you become so engrossed in all the different people, particularly Blythe, who has his whole big long storyline, and the fact that that he kind of loses his sanity because his designed purpose is that he was created by the Order and the Greater Will and all that shit to both to protect Ronnie, but to keep her in check as an Empyrean, right? So that once all of this happens and the Two Fingers are slaughtered and her connection is severed, he is meant to kill her, but instead he loses his sanity. And I think like the way I interpret like what happens is he can't maintain his faculties, but he doesn't even really betray her in the end, because he fights off there's like a group of Black Knives or whatever that are at the Ronnie's Rise in that area. That is where you can find him. Then you put him down if you've got to that point in the quest. But that like relationship with all those characters, and seeing that and being like, you're the last person in that mission that can help get Ronnie over the edge, and she finally like sort of confides in you by the end, is very powerful. And then I also want to just talk about like the like ending, the Age of Stars ending itself, and what it kind of implies, because I don't know if you got the full explanation, because it's a little bit like hard to it's easy to miss, because you have to talk to miniature Ronnie. I think it's if you have to go, it's when you're at Ronnie's Rise is where you can trigger it. But you can talk to miniature Ronnie again after you have finished her quest line and like put the ring on the finger and all that. And that's where you actually get the full explanation of what the Age of Stars ending kind of like is. I say full explanation. It's still, it's Souls. But I'm going to read.
Yes, I did get this. I'm looking at the dialogue right now. But yes,
yeah.
It did not necessarily tell me everything I would ever need to know, but I had a sense of it. Yes.
So I'm going to read out this dialogue and just talk about it, because I love this idea, or at least, obviously, I think it's very interpretational how you kind of read into what all this means, but I think it's just a very evocative concept, where she says, "I take it thou hast noticed. I shouldn't be surprised. I thought I might expound a little further upon the order I envision. Mine will be an order, not of gold, but the stars and moon of the chill night. I would keep them far from the earth beneath our feet. As it is now, life and souls and order are bound tightly together, but I would have them at a great remove, and have the certainties of sight, emotion, faith, and touch all become impossibilities, which is why I would abandon this soil with mine order. Wouldst thou come to me even now, my one and only Lord?" Which is where you're like, yes, I will come to you. Yes, like, let's do this shit, my queen. But I think what she's saying, and I think like a big part of like what the story of Elden Ring is about, particularly with the Age of Stars ending, is it's the classic cliche of like all great fantasy stories are about the end of fantasy, in the same way all great westerns about the end of the West and all that kind of stuff. That I think like what Ronnie is trying to do is take this mythological world where all things, fate, like order, life, death, the soul, the mind, the body, all these things are tightly bound together. that they are all in direct orbit, that like humanity and life and things are all controlled directly in direct proximity to things like fate and the stars and these sort of divine mythical concepts, and that all things are like certain and true, and all things are bound together in existence and order, and she wants to break that apart and bring them apart, which is of course the world that we live in, that we don't have certainty in our sight, in our emotion, in our faith, in the things we touch. That certainty in things is impossible in the world that we live in a way that in the world they live in it is not, because there are things that are capital T true about the world of the divine order and the greater will, because the greater will imposes truth and order and all those things on existence, and she wants to bring those things and bring them apart. And it's a part of her journey into like the darkness of the stars that you go on her with, is to bring existence out of like a condensed existence, but into a vast existence where humanity is one small part, and like more life and all those things is one small part of the grand sweep of what exists. I think that like the kind of poetic way in that which that is written, in the sense of bringing about this mythical, incredible, bizarre this mythological world of the gods, and ending that to bring about a like less romantic existence, but an existence where things can die and be reborn, and there are cycles, and that things are not dominated by gods and by order and by fate. I think is just such a compelling idea, and is so powerfully portrayed, I think, in that the poetic way, in the very sparse way that Dark Souls games tell their stories. And this is by far, I think, the most interesting ending any of these games has to me. I think the notion of what this does and the way it's portrayed, and similar to the Fia ending, the way that great like strength and like power and assurance is found in an ending that is visually and symbolically coded very darkly, in a way that in other games this would be a bad ending, because it's not bright colors and like happiness or anything. It is like an intense sort of somber thing you're going on, but it is one that is necessary to bring about a like better kind of existence into the world than the like twisted, decayed one that Ronnie and all these characters have lived under.
Well, exactly, and that's why, all these other endings they give you are basically restarting the cycle. Yes. Endings, right? And I think what's so interesting about that, because it took me a second when the game ended, I was like, oh, but I never became the Elden Lord and put the Elden Ring on my finger and all that stuff, and I thought about it, I'm like, that's so interesting that like it's kind of a red herring that this game is called Elden Ring, and you're told over and over again, like, go become the Elden Lord and reforge the Elden Ring and all that stuff. And in the best, at least we think, the truest ending here, all of that you push to the side and you start something entirely new here, right? And what you start is something that more resembles our world. It's banishing this order of mythology off to the stars, basically, right?
Yeah, and bringing back the Age of Man in like a Lord of the Rings version of like that's like the kind of wording that Lord of the Rings uses for the same conceptual sort of ending.
Exactly, and it is such a so it has similarities with other pieces of high fantasy, but it's told in such a FromSoftware, Hidetaka Miyazaki specific version of this thing, and it's so cool. And that's another area where I can see probably the hand of George R. R. Martin helped them here, because he's someone who just is practically a like scholar of high fantasy. When you hear him talk about this, he thinks very deeply about those tropes, and in a way that I would feel is probably pretty simpatico with like how Hidetaka Miyazaki thinks about these things, right?
Yeah.
And so it's beautiful.
Yeah, and I think one thing I like about thinking about like the Elden Ring and the Elden Lords and the thrones and all that part of it is I also think that there's like an element of the game where I think this is like an actual, in the like mythology or whatever, this is an actual proper ascendance of an actual new Elden Lord, in a way that like the thing that the game tells you is becoming an Elden Lord is wrong. Is like not even is not real, in the sense of that I think the only actual Elden Lord that like exists at the timeline of this game currently is Marika, right? She's the actual one that controls everything, and all of that. She was the Empyrean that arose to that status going through these steps, but then she is also like seemingly controlled or has some relationship to this like Elden Beast outer god. Like there's all the outer gods thing that exists around the edges that is like kind of Bloodborne-y or whatever. There are gods other than this Elden Beast thing that seems in the Erd Tree and all of that wants to be in this existence. But we find out in some of the item descriptions, particularly around that crumbling Azusla or whatever the fuck the area is called, with that there's a dragon boss that's an optional boss in that area. That if you read the descriptions on his items, it describes him as like the first quote unquote true Elden Lord. That I think to me just like strongly implies that this thing, the Erd Tree, all of this is not how everything has always been forever. And it's the thing that you see in a lot of places in Elden Ring, that there are other civilizations. There have been other versions of order, other versions of existence that have been in this land that are buried and that are in history, and that like Marika and the Erd Tree and all that and the Greater Will and the Two Fingers likes to present themselves as being eternal and like the true proper order and the true way of things to exist, when really I think like probably like the Order of Elden Lords is at least you have the dragons and whatever existence looked like with them when they were the top of the food chain or whatever. Then you have Marika and these like this outer god thing come in, and then now you have yourself and Ronnie, and that there's probably stuff that existed before the dragons and all that shit, and that the Erd Tree is not eternal. It is actually one piece or one idea of what existence looks like, and I think that's one of the places which that ending is very powerful, is that part of like breaking that cycle is you like in reinvigorating the world from a larger cycle, a larger historical cycle that exists beyond the confines of what the Greater Will gives you.
Exactly. This is a kind of story that all of the Souls games basically play with, which is the idea of a big cycle and whether that cycle continues or breaks. But I think it is honed to such an interesting point here where none of the FromSoft games are explicitly political in any sense, but I do think there's a very real political, real-world resonance to a story like Elden Ring, and the entire idea of this, big, long video game quest that is really about going and discovering an entire living, breathing world that bears history on its sleeves in so many ways, right? And in that world, you start out being told one set of things and seeing a version of the world that is presented to you as eternal and automatic and like this status quo not only should not be challenged, but cannot. It's just the thing as it exists. And of course, we can all think about the various things in the world we live in that are presented to us that way, like money or something like that, right? Something that is just like, you don't, in most political systems, you don't actually challenge the, like, idea of there being commerce in this way or something, right? But then you start to think about it and, you study and you find people who have challenged that and you think about other civilizations that have maybe done something different and you're like, oh, this is, something like that, right? And Elden Ring, I think, very much plays with those ideas in a high fantasy setting, but in a way that feels like it has very real resonance where, by the back half of the game, you are constantly brushing up against sin and death and heresy and all of these things that actually are the true path to finding anything that is truth, right? To the point where even the old crone who interprets for the Two Fingers is like, well, hey, if you want to burn this thing, let's do it. Let's fuck around. Let's figure this thing out, right?
Yeah.
And everyone has a little bit of like, I want to see the actual truth of this world. It's one of the things that I find so touching about Hugh and all of his stuff is he wants you to bring about the Ronnie world. Like, not literally. He doesn't, like, say that. But what he wants is for his swords to slay a god, which means to slay the falseness of this world that has been laid over our eyes, right? In a sense, almost like, destroying the Matrix or something, in a very, like, Marxist sense in some ways. But it's done on this scale of, like, eternity and mythology, which makes it hit in a very unique way.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite beats in the story is that thing with the crone, where I think is this after you come back from the Erd Tree, and all the Langdale stuff, being like, well, I can't get in there because it's covered up. And she's like, and the Two Fingers like, what? That's not, you're supposed to be, because they want you to, like, reforge the Elden Ring and reimpose Golden Order. Because at least my read on, like, Marika's character is that she kind of has realized a lot of this stuff is in the best way that she can is trying to, like, in that system and, like, break away from this god. And so they're like, what? Why? How? Why do you mean you can't just go in there and reforge the Elden Ring? That's what you're supposed to do, because that's what restarts up this cycle where we have control. And then the two fingers just like, they just go like completely stiff. And she says, oh, they're conferring with the greater will. We'll probably hear something from it in like 1,000 years. It's like some ridiculous number. And that's what she's like, it is heretical, but hey, if you want to burn it down, I ain't going to stop you. And it's like a real, like, you can tell that she knows she's not going to live to see what the fuck the two fingers are going to do and what their plan is. It's like, yeah, go for it, man. Let's do this shit. Rather than waiting for the greater will to get back to us in 1,000 generations or whatever.
Right. No, I love that. And I love, because those fingers go stiff and they never come back down, at least in the path I took. I know there's a whole ending where you go find the three fingers, and I'd be very curious to see all of that. Yeah, but I didn't do any of that stuff, and I'd be very curious where that stuff goes.
I saw that stuff, because there's like a very specific way you have to do it in order not to get locked into the bad ending. But basically, you've got the two fingers, and then you've got the three fingers, which are the three fingers left of the hand. So there's literally buried under Lanedale Capital, there is the three fingers, which are, again, it's the like pinky finger, the ring finger, and the thumb that is there. And it basically grabs you and burns. It scars onto your body like these markings of the three fingers that then, means you carry the frenzied flame, which is the power of chaos, which will bring about the frenzied flame stuff is all about conceptually almost the opposite of the Age of the Stars ending. Instead of taking this condensed existence and separating it out and bringing fate and the soul and body and mind and all those and separating them at a great distance where they're not intertwined. Instead, it is compressing everything conceptually until like all of existence is a chaotic mush, and bringing everything back into oneness is what the frenzied fingers want. And so it is seemingly like it is the mirror of what the Golden Order and the Greater Will is what the frenzied flame is, and the three fingers is the things that they cut off from like the natural order of existence in order to create their perfect golden order. And then it is trying to find a way to sort of enact this opposite vision of a chaotic world.
Yeah. It's just, it is as crazy and big and mythological as Elden Ring is. And I'll just add, like, in part because of this, it also feels like timely. There's something about this game being all about like embracing heresies and, breaking the rules and, sinning against the orders that have been imposed, that I'm like, yeah, this is the kind of like fucking punk rock shit we need right now. I love it.
Yeah, and I think the thing I most love about it is its insistence to code those things darkly and evilly, right, in the traditional way. I think it's like, it always takes the oomph out of a rebellious type story like that when it also like insists on making it very like kid friendly or whatever, and it's like, no, we're not doing anything bad, like we're not hurting anybody or anything like that. And it I think there's something very, as you say, punk, or something very cool about continuing to shroud it in the aesthetic and symbols and imagery of darkness and the moon and night and death, and not coating those things or like watering them down in any way. And it just gives it to you straight, because it's like, hey, being the bad guy, quote unquote, and being the rebel is fucking cool as shit. And it's like, yeah, I want to be a crazy skeleton lord and a moon knight and all that kind of shit. Like I want to like serve the powers of darkness because the powers of darkness know what's up. It's like how Satan is by far the most compelling and interesting element of Paradise Lost. It's like that's the kind of shit we're on with this. It's like we're the bad guys because the bad guys bring about the actual proper change that the world needs.
Yeah. We've said it for a long time. We at the Weekly Stuff Podcast are Satanists.
Exactly.
That's what we are. Yeah. Hail Satan. This will never come back to haunt me, I'm sure. Should we talk about some of the individual bosses?
Sure, yeah.
Which ones? We mentioned him earlier, so let's just go back to, what's the name of the snake guy at the volcano? Yeah, Rickard. It's so funny. I'm so glad that Demon's Souls got remade, because it's a very clear callback to the best fight in Demon's Souls, where in Demon's Souls you have the fight where you get you have to run through, it's the big like manatee bosses in the sky, I forget the name of it, but you have to get that special like sword where you send lightning down upon them, and it's not necessarily a difficult fight, but it is conceptually just insanely cool. It is like an amazing set piece, and they basically do the same thing with Rickard, where you have the guy has left you this special blade in there, and you get it, and you do these just big, insane swings to fight it, and it is one of my favorite things in this whole game. And it's not necessarily hard in the sense that they give you the tools to beat it, and so it's not gonna like you're not gonna do it 100 times, but it is so amazing.
Yeah, it's one of aesthetically the coolest bosses they've ever had. I just think the whole idea of Rickard and him blaspheming to like allowing himself to be consumed by this evil serpent creature, but in allowing himself to be consumed, he actually takes it over from the inside, and then he has, you know, Tanith and the whole Volcano Manor like gathering all these champions that he can bring to his side to make himself more powerful and to overthrow the Golden Order. Like all that shit is super cool. And yeah, it's there's not many gimmick. There's almost no other gimmick boss fights in Elden Ring, and so it's. Whereas I think Demon Souls sometimes I think feels a little bit frustrating where there are so many gimmicky boss fights. The fact that there are like only like one or two in Elden Ring means that when like a boss fight like that pops up where it has like this core gimmick of this special weapon they give you, it really stands out as being a particularly cool fight because of how different it is from everything else.
No, I totally agree. And I love the entire path leading up to it where you know, join with Tanith, and then you have to go on these quests to like invade other people's worlds to do their, or not literally other players, but you invade other worlds and you're killing other Tarnished to get to the point where she'll let you into the room with him, and then you just fucking kill him. Also, I just want to say, I have a crippling phobia of snakes, and that is maybe the gnarliest fucking boss in the world to me, because it's a big snake guy who comes out and strikes at you. It's pretty freaky.
Yeah, I forgot about that snake thing with you. Yeah. It didn't.
It sucks.
Yeah. That
no,
part...
but it is. But it's great. It feels like it was made to scare people like me specifically. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I loved that.
Did you see did you like go back to that area after you defeated him and see what happens with Tanith?
I mean, I talked to her a little bit. What happens?
Where she is eating his corpse. You see that?
No, I didn't see that.
If you warp back to that area sometime after you've killed Rickard, that's where Tanith goes. If you go back to Volcano Manor, you talk to her and she leaves. If you go back to the Rickard area, that's where she is, and she's like chewing on the remains of his corpse. It's really fucked up. It's a pretty great moment. I mean, that's one of the best things about Elden Ring is like everything is so fucked up. Like every side quest, I felt like. You should kind of stop most side quests halfway through the game if you want anyone to be happy, because anytime you see a side quest to its conclusion, it's like, oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen to you. Like, oh, Jesus Christ, I've ruined your entire life by proceeding on the side quest with you.
Yeah, no, it's there's plenty of gnarly fucked up stuff in this game. That's for sure. Yeah. What's another boss we should hit?
I like all the stuff of the game that really sells like a giant, like that sense of scale, and you can use your horse. So I really liked the fire giant. I thought that was just a like cool. That's a great boss. Again, anything where I can just like speed past the boss and slash at its fucking heels with my sword, it always makes me feel incredibly cool. And I thought that was like that felt like a boss fight that would be in a God of War game or something, rather than a Dark Souls. Like it's, you know, you get big bosses in Dark Souls games, but that thing is on like such a different scale than anything else, that I really enjoyed. As the kaiju lover in particular, like that one really tickled me.
I love that one. I think any boss fight that used torrent as a mechanic or allowed torrent to be used as a mechanic was particularly special, because, you know, I like the sense of scale in all the Souls games, but there's only so much you can do with hacking away at the ankles of something bigger than you can see. And I think torrent makes so much of that stuff more interesting. And I think the best version of this was the Radahn fight, which is probably my favorite boss in the game in the end.
I'd agree.
But man, there's no wrong choice. There's so many good ones. But yeah, I love any of the ones that integrate torrent. I kind of wish torrent had been there for the fight against the Elden Beast in the end. I think there's that would have made that fight better.
Yeah, I mean, because you just mentioned it, we might as well just talk about the Elden Beast fight, because I do think the last fight overall, like, I like the Radagon part of it just fine. I think it's, you know, it's not like the best boss fight in any Souls game or anything, but Like, I think the Ratigan one is like a decent version of a pretty standard last Dark Souls style boss. And then you defeat Ratigan, and then he turns into the Elden Beast. And the Elden Beast one, I think, is just annoying, partially because it's like the torrent thing would fix it, of like just having to constantly be running across the entire arena to try to get up on that thing to fight it was just very tedious. And it's like, if they just either gave you torrent or constrained the arena and made it didn't fly quite so far away, something like that, it wouldn't be so bad. Because when I figured out how to beat the boss, or at least one way to beat the boss is, I had one of the faith spells that gives you more resistance to holy, and that really makes that boss significantly easier once I realized I could use that spell, because it allowed me to tank a couple of its like abilities that are pretty hard to avoid. But even when I figured that out, it still was incredibly tedious to actually finish, because it was just like, oh god, now I gotta run all the way across here and run, get a hit in, and then, oh fuck, he flew away. Oh, time to run, like spend 30 seconds running all the way across the arena again. That would be probably the biggest thing I would change of any boss fight in this game, is fixing that weird like issue with the way that the Elden Beast fight is designed.
Yeah, I didn't like the Ratigan part much at all. I think that part is... I mean, visually it's cool. I like that he's using the fucking hammer that forged the Elden Ring, or broke the Elden Ring, sorry.
Well, both broke and is trying to reforge it, yeah.
Yes. All of that is cool. I thought he was, like, dialed up a notch beyond what was fair. Like, there's just, like, you can be dodging like crazy, and he will just throw something out of the ground. He has so many... I think both him and the Elden Beast have such a large set of attacks that are sort of very random in when they will come, that I found it very hard to anticipate in a just kind of annoying and trollish sort of way. So I did not like that part of the fight. The Elden Beast I liked more, just for the conceit of it. And if I could get the Elden Beast into the mode where he's swinging the sword not to send the big holy attacks at you, but just doing the big swings, those I could dodge very easily, get up on him with Rivers of Blood, and do a lot of damage, and he would sort of stay in a attack mode there where I could be up on him, and then my summon that I was using was like helping me with some of that, was sort of aggroing him. Some of that would work pretty well, but... So I didn't have as much of the having to run back and forth across the map with the Elden Beast as you did. But yeah, so I just, in general, there are so many amazing bosses down the home stretch. It was like, I was kind of hoping, I knew the final boss couldn't possibly be as good as the final boss of Sekiro, the best boss in video game history, because the reason that's so good in Sekiro is it is such a reward and final like push of learning the game's core mechanics, and Elden Ring can't do that because it has a million core mechanics that you could or could not engage with. But I did feel a little underwhelmed by the final boss. Not in a way that ruined the game or anything, but yeah.
Yeah. But other than that, I think like probably like the character that I think everyone like really considers to be the proper final boss of this game is Millennia. Like that is the character that to me is like design wise in a mechanical sense, and also in many ways in a presentational sense, just feels like she feels like, and a lot of the Halig Tree stuff feels like took the thing that normally would have ended up being the DLC of the game and just put it in the actual game, because Millennia feels like the Artorias or something like that of Elden Ring. Harder than Artorias for sure, because positioned as a final boss of that sequence rather than a mid boss. But she's got that whole vibe to her, and I thought that her fight was like very difficult. I would probably put that as the hardest fight in this game, but was rewarding and fun, and like she's just design wise, visually, aesthetically, her story, all that stuff is so fucking cool, that I really enjoyed that fight a lot.
It's incredible. You know, one day I did wind up summoning friends to do that one, because I could tell it was going to be a whole thing. I got so close one time, like, I mean, this much health on her at the end, and that was me doing it solo. And I think at that point I was just like, I'm just going to start summoning people, because I want to finish this game this weekend so we can talk about it on the podcast. I didn't want it to be like I'm going to be here a week on this fight. But that was fun too, because like summoning in these games is so fun to just, you get random people with random powers, and it's fun to see how people do things. So anyway, that helped. But it is an amazing fight. My favorite one down the home stretch might be Moog, the Lord of Blood.
That's a fun one.
One, his intro cutscene where where the blood starts dripping from the finger of Micallith.
Yeah.
Mikola, and then he comes out of the blood. That's probably my favorite cutscene in Elden Ring. I think it's just an amazing fucking cutscene. So I loved all of that. But then his fight was one that like really challenged me. I had a lot of trouble with it, but I also then had a lot of fun putting together sort of my creative solution to beating him, because my build was generally so much about being close in and doing attacks, and that's really hard with Moog because he can just wipe you out so fast if you're anywhere near him. And so it wound up being this combination of my main sort of what are the summons? They're not Ash of War. What are they called? The summons in this game?
I think they're called. There's some kind of ash, but I just call them a summon, I guess.
Yeah, the summons. But the main summon I wound up using for a lot was, I think it's like Banish Knight Engval is the one I wound up using a lot, because I leveled him all the way up, and he's just super tanky and can last a really long time. Usually, honestly, he lasted through most boss fights. He never got killed in the way I was using him. And he would aggro and allow me to do various things, and so I loved having him on the field. And what I would do for Moog is the first thing I would do is I would go in and I would pull out my dragons, and I would use it's Exyz's breath or something. It's the higher level version of the Scarlet Rot dragon breath. And I hit him with used a full FP bar of that and like poison this dude with Scarlet Rot. Then I would roll away, refill my FP, summon Engval, kind of regroup, make sure I'm healed and everything. Come in for some attacks, but a lot of what I would do is I would be sending the swarm of, I forget what it's called, but like the swarm rot.
Of flies,
The swarm of flies. I would send a lot of those at him. Just a lot of stuff I could do from afar, and then sometimes getting in and inflicting some bleed on him. But mostly I kind of would find scenarios where I could hit him with the Scarlet Rot breath again, and poison him and sort of let that take him down. And that was very fun. That helped a lot. And that was also something I used. I used that trick a couple of times. That was the most elaborate version of it that I ever did, because I had to find certain places to do it. But when I did it, I felt very, very proud of myself.
Yeah, I think that's pretty similar, if I remember correctly, to what I did, because I used the main two summons I used, and I definitely hit a point where I think early on in the game I didn't do summon. Because I never ended up summoning any like other players, but doing the NPC summons, the Spirit Ashes, I think that's what they're called.
Spirit Ashes, yeah.
Yeah, like I early on I didn't use that a lot in the boss fights, because I think I had the mentality of like, I'm gonna just do this myself. And then about the midpoint of the game, I think it really clicked for me of how much it feels like a lot of those fights are really designed for you to be using the Spirit Ashes.
Yes.
So I think,
well, they give you so many and so many types, like you have to be, yeah.
Yeah, and so like that became a very fun part of the game, and I think it makes a lot of the boss fights significantly more easier than the boss fights are in other Souls games, if assuming you don't do like other player summons. But it gives them a very different feel, and again, I think some of the bosses feel specifically designed with their movesets around the idea that there is another entity in the room that is like pulling aggro. Like there's some bosses like the meteor beasts or whatever the fuck they're called, that like just feel like I'm not sure how you're meant to beat them without pulling aggro, or just having a different build than I did that would make it easier to do, because there's just some attacks that are so difficult to dodge. But so I at the midpoint I started using Spirit Ashes a lot, and I really liked using the Black Knife Tish. I think was one I really used a lot. And then I also did particularly like the Mimic tier, particularly because it felt like it was like a Naruto thing. It felt with my anime edgelord dude that I'm using like a shadow clone jutsu type thing. And there's something fun about like there's something, because the AI, if you did the Mimic tier, always felt slightly different than the other ones, because it basically felt like you were like summoning an invader or something like that. So it had the same kind of AI as an invader, and there's something about that was fun, that I felt like I could rely on the AI to do specific things that allowed me to like run around the target, and there's something fun about this idea of having like two versions of my character doing these things at the same time, that I think like had that very kind of mythical heightened quality to it. So I'm pretty sure with Moog I mostly used the Mimic tier, and had him up close with the katanas, and I was shooting blood magic, and I ended up in the late game using a lot of the holy spell that shoots a giant lightning bolt at people, because that was some cool fucking Zeus shit I could do, and I did that a lot in the home stretch also.
Yeah, so somehow I made it through this whole game and I never tried the Mimic tier. And I realized that last night because my brother was telling me about it. And I've heard so many people talking about it, and I just never, for whatever reason, broke it out and used it. I used a lot of other ones, but I never used the Mimic tier. Yeah, but I loved Moog. We already mentioned and I'm forgetting its name again.
Malekith?
There's a lot of M names in this game. Yeah, Malekith. We did that one. What are some other bosses to mention?
I ended up beating this boss very quickly because how over leveled I was when I got to Lindell. But fighting Morgott, right, like proper, that kind of like the second version of that fight at the end of Lindell where he's in the throne area or whatever, and that's one of my favorite cutscenes in terms of dialogue, where he just going through like listing all the different demigods, some of which you have killed by that point, some of which you have not yet encountered, and him like calling them all like traitors and stuff. I completely bodied that dude because I was like 50 levels or something ridiculous higher than probably you were meant to be. But that was a very fun fight that felt very gratifying to sort of refight him in obviously a more powered up version compared to him fighting him in front of the Stormvale Castle.
Yes, that was pretty similar for me. Godfrey at the end of the game, who's the second to last boss. I really loved getting to him because I have the steel book of this game that is a big image of Godfrey from like the concept art. And so when he finally came out at the end and he's got his big lion and he's got his big axe and all that stuff, I went, hey, that's the guy from the steel book. And I think it's a cool fight because in the middle of it, he turns into his like human form, which is what's his name? Something Lu. It's like Nephili Lu.
Horalu.
Horalu. And that guy, man, I did not know how to, like, I could not get away from that guy fast enough. I had a light build on and everything. And what I wound up doing was hitting him with Scarlet Rot and then I have video of this that I will probably share at one point because it's fucking hilarious, of him slowly dying of Scarlet Rot while I am running around getting wrecked by this guy, just hoping I will last until the end. It's absolutely pathetic, but I did technically do it on my own. I mean, I didn't cheat or anything. I used the tools of the game, but it's hilarious.
Yeah, I liked him. That was one of like I just like was shocked when he showed up. Like I think the idea that Godfrey was still alive didn't even occur to me because obviously like the whole thing was that Ratigan was the second Elden Lord. So presumably I just thought, well, that must mean the first Elden Lord is dead. And then he shows up and I'm like, what the fuck? And then he's like, and actually I'm Horalu, and I'm like, you mean, are you like Nephili's fucking dad? What the fuck? So you're like a crazy barbarian dude who became king, and then he fought the fire giants. It's like, and a lot of like the lore that like immediately as soon as he said that just like clicked into place in my head. I'm like, oh, okay, that makes a lot of sense because you just didn't learn a lot specifically about Godfrey across the game, or like always felt like there's like a piece missing with his story, and finding out that he was like some human dude who was sort of like this barbarian land that came and then became Marika's consort. And then was kind of banished, basically, I think is the story after the Giants' War. He was like, well, I did all the warring, I unified this land, I did all my shit, I got nothing else to do. And so then he left, and then he comes back right at the end and is like, hey, I'm back, I'm the first Elden Lord, let's go. And then you murder him.
Yep, that's a good one. I enjoyed that one a lot. What are some other ones near the end? I mean, you do fight Sir Gideon Ofnir. I bodied that guy so fucking fast.
He died so fast. It's like he's dude's.
Yes.
Yeah. If you're so all-knowing, you really should have known you're gonna get your ass kicked here, buddy.
Yes. No. Kicked his ass. That was fun. And I love you get his armor too, because I love the whole look of Sir Gideon Ofnir, and that whole character is so fun. What are some other late game ones that I've fought so many bosses in the last couple of days that I'm forgetting some of them, I'm sure. But they're all, I mean, there's so many good ones. Because, in general, I would say the Elden Ring bosses wind up being easier than a lot of Souls bosses. But some of that is just because of the amount of, most of that is because of the amount of tools they gave you. Yeah. If you popped most of these bosses into Elden Ring, into, like, Dark Souls 1, they would all be, like, the hardest boss of Dark Souls 1, you know? 100%. So, in a lot of ways, Elden Ring is, like, way harder. And in a lot of ways, it's easier because of the kind of game it is and the amount of things they give to you.
Yeah, but one thing I appreciate is I think just because of like the way the Spirit Ashes work, it just felt like I didn't get stuck on bosses almost ever.
Exactly.
There's like one or two that like it took me a while to get past. Like Millennia was definitely probably the one I fought the most. Either her or Radon was also I did a few times. But that felt appropriate because it felt like scaled to the rest of the game, right? Like there are so many more bosses and so much more to see and do that it just doesn't feel like you're meant to get stuck on bosses and fight them over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. Like a Sekiro or Bloodborne or something like that. It feels like they're meant to be challenging, they're meant to be memorable, they're meant for you to like try to figure it out and do it a few times, but it doesn't feel like you're meant to fight them like 20 times in a row or something before you can finally get it done.
Yeah, I think that's generally true. There were some that, there were very few, if any, I got stuck on in like overnight fashion where like I would go until the next day to beat. And so there's definitely a sense of movement, which helps because there's like dozens more bosses than in any of these other games because they're everywhere. They pepper the whole landscape. One of the other ones that was really hard for me, I think I've already mentioned it here, but was the Valiant Gargoyles. That is one of my favorites in terms of just that one kicked my ass, but beating it felt good. One that's funny is in Crumbling Farum Azula, there is one of the bosses is the Godskin Duo. And I was watching a YouTube video of someone did of ranking the bosses in this game by difficulty, and they had Godskin Duo at like number 3 or 4,
People
like
think
way
that
high
boss
up.
is super hard, and I beat him on first try. Like I didn't think that boss fight was hard at all.
Yeah, I don't get that. I not only, Sean, did I beat him first try, I had no idea I was coming up on a boss, and I was like, I had like 2 flasks left. I was on my last legs, and I kicked that thing's fucking ass. I bodied it in one go. It didn't stand a chance. Why do people think the Godskin Duo is hard? Where does that come from?
I have no idea. Like, that's so funny that you have the exact same experience as I did. Because when I saw people talking about it online, I literally didn't even know what the fuck they were talking about because the boss made such a nothing impression on me because it was just like, because I think it's a remix of 2 bosses, right? Don't you fight
yes, it is.
each one of those individually at other points of the game, and then it's just like the boss fight, it's just you put both of them together. It's like I have no idea why people think they're particularly hard. Like I imagine if you refuse to use Spirit Ashes, it's probably hard because any multi-boss fight is hard if you don't have the Spirit Ashes. But using the Spirit Ashes, it's one of the places where I think the game feels like it's designed for you to do it. Pulling some of that aggro, I think, makes that boss like not particularly memorably. Like I remember it being fun, like it was an enjoyable fight, but yeah, I just like went through it and beat them. So I have no idea why people find that to be particularly hard.
We mentioned it earlier, but the Lich Dragon Fortisax, which is the end of Fia's quest, is one of my favorites. That might be my favorite dragon I fought. It's just a really cool fight, but there's lots of cool dragons, obviously. So yeah, I liked that one.
Yeah, there's the crazy like Bloodborne style giant outer god monsters. Like you fight 1 or 2 of those. Like you fight one near the end of the Rani quest. They're like these giant like alien star centipede monsters that are pretty fucking weird and crazy. I remember the first time I fought, because I think you fight 2 of them over the course of the game. When I fought the first one the first time, I was like, what the fuck is this thing? Where the fuck did this guy come from? I remember that being cool.
These ones are not necessarily hard, but they're some of my favorites in terms of presentation and what you do to fight them is the different ancestor spirits. There's a couple of those you fight. And I think we've already mentioned those, but those are just, I love those bosses so much. And the music that plays around them, it's super cool.
Yeah, I'm scrolling down the list of bosses. I think we've hit most of the major ones. I mean, we've definitely talked about this. I definitely talked about it, I think, on the first episode we talked about Elden Ring. But I just want to shout out the fucking dragon boss fights because you do them enough.
So good.
I think it's like easy to almost kind of take for granted how good they are. But like this game has by far, without a doubt, like not even anything close to competition, the best implementation of dragons in the game ever.
Oh, easily. It makes Skyrim look so fucking pathetic, which I think Skyrim already looked fucking pathetic because it's got the worst combat in like any game ever. But like the dragons are supposed to be cool and just piddle little arrows at them. But no, in this game, the dragon fights, especially when you're on torrent, I mean, man alive. One that really kicked my ass and like stopped me in my tracks and like really was hard for me was Borealis, the freezing fog.
Yeah, that one's hard.
That one that's up on the mountaintop of the giants. That's one that I do think I actually stopped and like tried it again the next morning and had to like regroup and try different strategies. That one, because I think in general this game takes a huge difficulty spike when you get up to the mountaintops of the giants, and ultimately I like that because I think you have enough there that it's good that it really kicks up the challenge for you and makes you try different things, because it did make me evolve my playstyle in different ways. But yeah, Borealis, that one was, but all of the dragons, it feels like you're fighting an actual dragon. It feels like if you went into Lord of the Rings and tried to fight Smaug one-on-one, you know?
Yeah, that Borealis one is particularly memorable because the way you are introduced to that fight, where you're like you're like riding your horse over a frozen lake, and then the fog starts coming, and you're like, what the fuck is going on? And then all of a sudden, this like something roars at you from within the fog, but you can't see it. Then like icy breath shoots out of nowhere, and and the fucking life bar shows up saying Borealis the ice dragon or something. And you start freaking out. Like that's a particularly memorable one. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite boss?
I think it's Radon / Millennia. I think Radon for like the spectacle and the like. It's just such a crazy, ridiculous boss fight. Like summoning all the people and charging up on the fucking hill. Him coming down as a meteor. Like all that shit is utterly insane. I think like the spectacle and the novelty of it is that in that element. That's the best boss. I think the most like sort of satisfying mechanical boss is Millennia. I think that's like the tightest boss fight that really kind of pushed me really hard. In that sense, I like the Millennia fight and the big craziness of it. I like the Radon fight the most.
Yeah. I think that makes sense. I think Radon is my favorite, and I think Radon is my favorite because it has all that spectacle that you're saying, but it's still super hard. Like, it is still a really properly challenging one that really kicked my ass and made me reconsider parts of my build and stuff like that. So it's a good mix of like kind of, it has elements of a gimmick fight, but it's not a gimmick fight.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's so cool about it. It encompasses a lot that makes this game special. And yeah, Millennia is obviously excellent. I really liked Moog. There's countless good ones. As is always the case, FromSoft makes the best bosses. They put most people's bosses to shame. And they kind of have to with the kind of games they are, but still. Yeah, and in general, I would still agree. The best bosses FromSoft has made are in Sekiro, but that's because of the kind of game Sekiro is.
Yeah, it's just like it's like it doesn't make sense to compare them at a certain point because it's just they're kind of different kinds of games.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are there any areas we still need to talk about that we haven't maybe gone into? Because we've talked about different areas like Caelid and Liurnia and Limgrave in other podcasts leading up to this one. We obviously haven't said much about Mountaintop of the Giants. I love that area. The fucking spectacle of running across giant chains covered in snow between mountains, particularly when you get up to the Forge of the Giants and you're running up the chain to this big, like, giant-sized pot in the ground. That's just one of the great images in the history of video games.
Yeah, no, that area is fantastic. I think that and the consecrated snowfield, which is sort of adjacent to it, are both really cool. And as I said earlier, like there's a really harsh difficulty jump there, but in a way that feels very satisfying, I think. Partially because, right, the rest of the game is designed for you to be able to approach in so many different ways and so many different orders that it feels like, you know, a lot of that kind of middle stretch of the game, I think, is substantially easier than any other Souls game because you're over leveled, because you're inevitably over leveled. Because if you've already done like Caelid and you fucked around over there, that means that by the time you go to Rey Lucaria, you've over leveled most of the stuff there because the stuff there is easier than Caelid, and there's stuff like that all over the place. So similarly, I think like a lot of the basic enemies in like the Lendel capital were not particularly hard. A lot of the boss fights there didn't feel particularly hard because if you've done everything else before you go to Lendel, you're really powerful. But the game really expects you to have done most things in the game, at least in a general sense, before you go to the Mountaintop of the Giants. So it feels like that's where the difficulty clicks back into like, oh shit, this is like early Elden Ring. This is hard again. Like I really have to like, I can't just sort of sleep my way through some of these fights. You have to be on your toes through that whole area. I think that's very satisfying. And I think particularly the consecrated snowfield, the like Albinorix and all of that stuff there, and the crazy sequence where you go into the like past or whatever in that little village and there's like the sniper archers on the rooftops.
Oh my god, that part is so mean. I love it.
and there's the invisible black knife assassins that you can, I don't know if you did this, Jonathan, but there's an item, there's a torch that I carried with me the whole game, that when I got it I had read the description that said like this torch can reveal like invisible things or something, like it can make seen what is unseen or some bullshit Dark Souls description. I saw it, I'm like, eventually this torch will be used for something. And I carried it with me the whole game in the back of my head being like, eventually there's going to be something you can use this fucking torch with. And when you get to that village, as far as I know, this is the only time this pops up the entire game. There are black knife assassins in that village that are invisible that will attack you if you get too close, and you can't see them to know whether or not you're getting too close. But if you have that torch out, it makes them visible. And I was like, yes, finally. This, like, as soon as I got hit by an enemy, I'm like, I couldn't see that. Is that invisible? I'm like, is this finally the time? And I put that fucking torch on, and then there's a stupid black knife dude there, and I kicked his ass. I'm like, yes, finally this torch. I've been carrying the torch for this torch forever, and now it has come in handy.
I probably had that torch, but I did not remember any of that because by the time I got to that area, it had probably been like a month and 60 hours of game time.
Yes, because that would have been after all of your New Orleans shit. Because you get the torch relatively early, or at least I did. It's like in a cave dungeon or something somewhere in the first half of the game.
Yes. But yeah, that's funny. You know, I struggled through that area basically first trying to fight the Black Knife Assassins, and I did kill them a couple times, but it took so much out of me that ultimately I wound up just running around that area and hopefully not getting hit. But it was great. That's the kind of like when Miyazaki likes to just troll you that I kind of like, because it's not a boss fight. You can try like, and if you get one of the things, you have to light 4 torches, and if you light them, they stay lit. So it's not. The trolling that it does is low stakes, but it's very funny. So I like that kind of thing a lot.
And it's just like, there's never been another area in any of these games that has felt like that. Like, it felt like I was playing a Call of Duty game or something where I'm like taking cover and like trying to line up shots. It's like, where's that sniper coming from? It's like the fucking Russian levels in Call of Duty 2 or some shit. It's just really like, this is so crazy. Behind this, like this behind the enemy lines level in fucking Elden Ring. I love that place.
There's all the underground areas that I think are so cool, like Nokrin, the Eternal City, and the Mogwin Dynasty Palace, and all of this. You go to different places with Rani, and just all of that. Just there's so much cool stuff down there, and I remember just realizing the first time I got down there, I'm like, there's a whole world down here too, and it's not exactly like 1-to-1 of the landmass of the above, but there is a lot of area down there.
Yeah, I remember feeling there's like 2 or 3 more areas down there than I expected. You know,
yes,
because I thought there would be a couple after you discover that first one, but there's like maybe like 6 or 7 different like distinct areas and like ways to get down there. The whole underground area is awesome. We obviously talked about a lot of that on one of the earlier podcasts, because that's where we talked a lot about the like buried civilizations and the ancestor spirits and all that kind of stuff, which is super cool.
Yeah. I think Melania overshadows it, but the Halig tree and the city at the base of the Halig tree and all of that, absolutely one of my favorite areas. I really hope FromSoft, like in either Elden Ring 2 or whatever, they do next, keeps up this kind of vertical design that they got into in Elden Ring, because it's super cool, some of it, and just like in a way that most games don't quite embrace verticality that way. It's really interesting how it builds dense areas based on going up and down. Is fascinating to me. I love it.
There's also, you find a lot of the ants there, and that's like one of the gnarliest looking enemies, the big fucking hairy, gross ants.
Because there's basically 3 phases. There's going through because it's all going down to the root of the tree to fight Melania. And so you have the whole part where you're in the tree itself, and there are some ants up on the tree, which is fun. And you've got those guys. But then you've got the city you move through. Then you have, under all of that, is where you have to move through like the big scarlet rot areas. And it's like the classic, like Miyazaki's going to throw you in a fucking poison pool where you walk slow. And I think it's one of the best versions of that. It's an amazing, amazing area.
Yeah, also, like, shout out to Miyazaki for getting, like, a dozen different poison swamp areas in this game. There's so many. This isn't a complaint. I fucking love it. There's so many poison swamp areas. It's crazy. It is like, I just remember seeing a tweet from, I think, a game critic who reviewed the game sometime around the launch, of them being like, trust me, there are more poison swamp areas in this game than you think there are. And I just had that tweet in the back of my head the entire time I played the game, because it was truly, like, because it like almost never stopped. It was like, I half expected when you get to fucking Lane Dell, once it's been ruined at the end of the game, that it's just a giant poison swamp. It's like, you motherfucker. It's like, God, Jesus Christ, there's so many swamps in this game.
Yes. Like, what if, like, when you're fighting the Elden Beast and you're sort of you're atop all that water, what if it was just a poison swamp instead?
Oh, Jesus, that fight would be impossible.
Yes, it would be. But I feel like in his heart of hearts, Miyazaki would love to do that one day, but they won't let him.
Yeah, he probably did put that in the design doc, and then like someone conveniently forgot to implement it into the final version of the area.
Yes, exactly. Oh man, but no, I could not choose a favorite area of this game. No. They're so good. There's no weak area to me. I love all of them. I love all the different places you go. I love a lot of just the little mini dungeons. Some of them are annoying and some of them are fucking amazing. Yeah. It's incredible. For the amount of like little mini dungeons you go to. In general, I just found those really to be fun little mini labyrinths, and there's some really creative ones.
Yeah, they do a lot with like what are, they don't like, because they're very obviously formulaic in the sense of that, like, they're constructed out of the same pieces, generally speaking. Of like, there's
Right.
a couple of different types. There's like caves, there's the tombs, and stuff like that. And so they have, it feels almost like the Chalice Dungeon concept from Bloodborne, which was like a like almost roguelike-esque area you could go to that would change algorithmically based on every time you went in, it would change up what the level layout was based on a series of blocks. So it has a little bit of that vibe, but obviously they're not just randomly laid out or anything. They are fully designed dungeons for all of them. But I think it's very impressive how much mileage they're able to get out of that and how fresh they still felt. Because there were a bunch that were like, oh, this is just like a quick 5 minute, like you're in, you're out. It wasn't very hard. And then every once in a while you'd run into one where it's like a catacomb that took you like 45 minutes to get through. And it was like huge and super elaborate. And they did all these like creative things with it throughout. And you just saw shit that you wouldn't expect. It's like a real kind of like place, I felt like, for a lot of the designers on the game to kind of show off and really express simple, interesting game concepts in a Dark Souls like style game in these little bite-sized sort of self-contained areas.
Absolutely. I also want to give a shout out to the music because especially in the second half of this game, there is a lot of really beautiful and haunting and rousing music. I mean, God, the music in the last couple of bosses is just out of this world. But I think everything in Lanedale is like you just get this sense of like death and decay and the passage of time from it in a really like, in a way that really enhances the kind of mysterious dark beauty of the area. That was probably my favorite area for music. But in general, I think this and Sekiro both have kind of stepped up the music in FromSoft games in really meaningful ways.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think in particular the last set of bosses all have some of the best boss music in any of these games. Yeah, it's a great part of it.
That's the best thing about the Radagon boss fight and Elden Beast is the music in that is amazing. Because they basically, for the Elden Beast, play the main theme of the game again that was there from the I was surprised. It's there in the first trailer. The E3 announcement trailer has the theme of the game, which is so cool. But yeah, love all of that. What else? Is there anything else we need to say about Elden Ring at this time?
You just mentioned the trailer stuff. A thing that people should do if you haven't after you finish the game is go back and watch like the announcement trailer and the story trailer.
Yeah.
Because it's basically you get these really nice CG depictions of events from the game that like after you know who Radon and Melania is and stuff like that, getting to see a cool CG version of them fighting is so fucking cool. Like it's like building that affection for the game and its world. Then it also, I think the story trailer actually does help like clarify some of the timeline and stuff if you watch that after you've played the game. Like that was a really pleasant kind of surprise where I kind of on a whim after like it was like an hour after I finished the game I couldn't stop thinking about it and I ended up looking at, because I think it was I started looking up the other endings of the cutscenes on YouTube, and then that led me down to watching the old trailers and realizing, oh my god, like all the shit with Ronnie and the Knight of the Black Knives and all that, and even like the fact that Marika is the person who shattered the Elden Ring is like just shown in some of those trailers. If you just don't have the context for it, you don't realize that all that shit is just showed in those trailers. And it is like you only have the context for it once you rewatch it and you can kind of put together the pieces of what they're showing.
I feel like with a lot of games that take us long to come out after their announcement, you go back and look at trailers and you're like, this isn't quite representative of what we wound up getting. No, it's exactly like that was Elden Ring. They knew what this game was, and from that very first trailer where the guy is holding up the severed arm, that's Elden Ring.
Yeah, so those trailers, it's just like getting a fun little CG mini short film or something depicting the history of this world, and that's pretty awesome.
Yeah. Well, Sean, all I can say is Mario plus Rabbids 2 is going to have to be really good to unseat Elden Ring as Game of the Year.
I'm just very happy that I was, worried that I would be, have no choice but to give Genshin Impact Game of the Year 3 years in a row. This and it'd be kind of stretching that like it's not a joke, but like this sort of bit of like, okay, fuck, let's just Genshin Impact, and I feel like with Elden Ring makes it very easy to be like. I like almost no matter how good Genshin Impact is for the rest of the year, it's like Genshin Impact got 2 Game of the Year awards for me. Elden Ring, like, you're set. You know, you're good. Like, I don't think anything could possibly challenge this. It would be the most incredible upset in the history of Game of the Year awards ever, if something else was able to come out that's better than this game.
And I'm not picking on Mario plus Rabbids 2. I am very much looking forward to that. I just like the idea of holding it up next to Elden Ring is very funny to me. But yes, anyway. Really, I do think the Rabbids are a greater existential horror than anything Miyazaki has ever come up with, so...
Sure, I mean, from what I read of an interview, like, he wanted to implement the Rabbids into one of the boss fights, but they said, no, it will get an adults-only rating if we put them in the game. So we
now I'm imagining using my Rivers of Blood katana on a rabbit and just cutting it into pieces.
I'm just imagining the ominous, Soul style opening boss cutscene with the rabbit slowly turning and blood dripping from its eyes. Wouldst thou come to challenge me, tarnished? Let us have at it. Let us devour the gods.
We've probably talked about it enough for now. Elden Ring, phenomenal game, and we'll surely talk about it more later this year.
Yeah, I think I give Elden Ring 5 stars out of 5.